Ryoma Saionji wanted nothing more than an ordinary, peaceful life, but one impulsive wish throws him into a fantasy world where divine attention, a hidden race, and extraordinary power make normality impossible. The opening drops straight into a violent clash, showing that his new life will be far more dangerous than the quiet existence he once desired. In the middle of battle, Ryoma realizes that he has just completed another quest. As the enemy falls, a reward notification appears before him, turning the dangerous encounter into another achievement within the strange, game-like system that now governs his life. 3 hours earlier, Ryoma Saionji was still an ordinary university student in Japan. On his days off, he shut himself inside his hobby room to read light novels, watch anime, and play games, making his sudden appearance on a battlefield feel completely impossible. Although Ryoma comes from the wealthy Saionji family, he lives comfortably only because of his parents' money. Every other member of the family is an elite doctor, politician, or business leader, while he sees himself as the only completely ordinary person among them. Ryoma's relatives constantly mock him for being average. And even people who once acted friendly now insult him behind his back. His parents have also stopped working, leaving him increasingly tired of the expectations, gossip, and pressure attached to the Saionji name. Because the family name attracts attention, Ryoma wishes he could hide his lineage and live peacefully. Anyone approaching him is interested only in the Saionji label, and once they discover how ordinary he really is, they become disappointed and drift away. Exhausted by reality, Ryoma admits that he wants to escape to another world and live quietly there. He knows reincarnation is impossible, but after another frustrating day, the fantasy of leaving everything behind becomes the only thing that comforts him. A mysterious voice suddenly answers his wish, and calmly promises to make it come true. Before Ryoma can understand what is happening, an overwhelming force engulfs him, turning what sounded like an impossible fantasy into reality. Ryoma awakens in a completely unfamiliar room and panics, because only moments earlier he was still at home. As he looks around the strange surroundings, he realizes this is neither a dream nor any place he recognizes. A notification appears on Ryoma's smartphone, revealing several impossible applications: translation, inventory, God Quest, God Store, search, and mail. The familiar device has somehow become a supernatural interface connected to his transfer into this world. The first message welcomes Ryoma Saionji by name. Mishufim, the goddess of games and pleasure, explains that Ryoma's heartfelt wish was heard and that he has been invited to live in another world called Mur. The message describes Mur as a fantasy world similar to the novels and games Ryoma loves, where swords, magic, and monsters truly exist. Ryoma can barely believe that the setting he always dreamed about has become his new reality. Ryoma remembers wishing for another world, yet he still struggles to accept that the transfer is real. Mishufim also explains that his smartphone was modified for use in Mur, giving him tools that ordinary residents do not possess. The thought of exploring a world filled with magic and swords overwhelms Ryoma with excitement. What first seemed terrifying now feels like an unbelievable opportunity, and he begins looking forward to enjoying this new life to his heart's content. Ryoma opens his status and wonders what race he has become: an elf, beastman, or something else. Although his appearance and physical sensations seem unchanged, the smartphone suggests that his identity in Mur may be far from human. The status screen finally displays Ryoma's information. As he studies the unfamiliar values and abilities, one particular entry immediately stands out, making him realize that the gods have not brought him here as an ordinary traveler. Ryoma discovers that his race is Demigod, a rare existence created through a god's blessing and power. Although he initially tries to stay calm, the revelation is far greater than anything he expected from a simple transfer. The search function explains that only 5 demigods currently exist in Mur, and that a new one has just been added. Ryoma instantly worries that his arrival will attract unwanted attention, recreating the very problem he wanted to escape in Japan. Rather than letting fear ruin the opportunity, Ryoma decides to enjoy himself. He opens the inventory and equips the clothes, armor, and weapons provided for beginners, preparing to take his first real steps in the new world. Equipping the starter gear automatically completes a tutorial quest. Ryoma receives 10 God points and a skill reward before he even fully understands the system, proving that completing divine quests can quickly strengthen him. Ryoma learns that God points can be spent in the God store to buy skills and useful abilities. Realizing that the smartphone is effectively a powerful cheat, he becomes eager to complete more quests and increase his strength. Among the tutorial missions, one task proves much harder than the others, retrieving an item from a dangerous area. Ryoma struggles repeatedly, discovering that even with divine support, surviving in Mur will still require effort and courage. After exhausting himself, Ryoma rests for the night and resumes the tutorial the following day. By steadily completing the remaining tasks, he gathers more skills, resources, and practical experience with smartphone's functions. While reading a magic guidebook, Ryoma discovers instructions for water magic and decides to test them. He focuses on the image described in the book, hoping the spell will work despite his complete lack of experience. The spell fires successfully, sending water forward with far more force than Ryoma expected. Stunned by the result, he finally understands that he can truly use magic and celebrates achieving one of his greatest otherworld fantasies. Ryoma soon realizes that he has been transported to an isolated forest far from civilization. With the sun already setting and no safe shelter nearby, he knows he must find a way out before darkness makes the wilderness even more dangerous. A pack of wolf-like monsters suddenly surrounds Ryoma. The creatures attack without hesitation, forcing him into his first true life-or-death battle before he has had time to become comfortable with his new body or equipment. Ryoma draws his sword and tries to fight, but the monsters are faster and more aggressive than expected. His inexperienced movements leave him overwhelmed, and the excitement of entering another world quickly gives way to genuine fear. When one monster closes in, Ryoma raises his sword to defend himself. The weapon fails to stop the attack cleanly, making it painfully clear that simply owning powerful equipment does not mean he knows how to use it. Ryoma is knocked down and realizes that continuing like this will get him killed. Desperate for help, he wonders whether anyone is watching over him, but no divine rescue appears, leaving him responsible for his own survival. Remembering the water spell, Ryoma decides to rely on magic instead of his sword. He gathers his courage and prepares a concentrated attack, hoping the ability that shattered his practice target can also protect him from real monsters. Ryoma unleashes the spell at close range. A violent torrent tears through the attacking beasts, proving that his water magic is vastly stronger than his clumsy swordsmanship, and immediately changing the course of the battle. The blast continues across the battlefield, throwing the remaining monsters away with overwhelming force. Ryoma can only stare as the spell he cast in desperation creates destruction far beyond anything he intended. When the water finally settles, the monsters lie defeated around him. Ryoma remains shaken by the power he released, but the silence confirms that he has survived his first battle entirely through his own decision and magic. Relief floods over Ryoma as he celebrates defeating the monsters alone. With the immediate danger gone, he continues through the forest and eventually reaches an open road, finally escaping the wilderness before night fully falls. A guarded carriage approaches, and Ryoma is amazed to see people of races unlike ordinary humans. The travelers are equally surprised by his appearance, but instead of treating him as an enemy, they cautiously begin a conversation. The group explains that the nearest city is too far to reach safely on foot and offers Ryoma a ride. Grateful for the unexpected kindness, he accepts, realizing that meeting these travelers may have saved him from another dangerous night outside. Ryoma learns that the travelers are adventurers hired to guard the carriage. They ask whether he is also a traveler, and he carefully avoids revealing his divine race while trying to understand how people in this world normally live. Two members of the group introduce themselves as Lunas and Perme. Their friendly attitude immediately eases the tension, giving Ryoma his first genuine social connection since arriving in Mur. Ryoma introduces himself and boards the carriage bound for the City of Fails. As the journey begins, he feels that meeting these companions is the true first step toward building a life in this unfamiliar world. During the ride, the group confirms that everyone is heading to Fails. Ryoma listens closely to their conversation, using the trip to learn about local customs, geography, and the role adventurers play in the region. Ryoma claims to come from the east, while his companions explain that they work as adventurers from a nearby village. They tell him he can speak casually with them, gradually making the isolated newcomer feel included. When the group stops for lunch, Ryoma admits he is not hungry and plans to drink only water. His companions offer food anyway, but the simple break soon leads them to discover one of his unusual talents. Ryoma produces water with magic, impressing everyone around him. They assume he must be a trained water mage, but he insists that he is only an ordinary traveler, still unaware of how exceptional his chantless casting appears. The others explain that water is precious during travel, and that most mages must chant before casting. Ryoma realizes the divine manual never mentioned chanting, meaning his effortless magic is another ability that could expose how abnormal he is. The carriage finally reaches Fales. Ryoma stares in wonder at the large walls, crowded streets, and unfamiliar architecture, thrilled to see a true fantasy city with his own eyes. For the first time since arriving in Mur, the fantasy world feels vividly real rather than distant or imaginary. Inside the city, every shop captures Ryoma's attention, especially the weapon stores and bustling markets. The lively streets look exactly like the setting of an adventure game, making his new world feel increasingly real. After unloading the carriage, the travelers thank Ryoma and offer advice about where to stay. He appreciates their help, recognizing that their guidance has allowed him to enter the city without becoming completely lost. Ryoma arrives at the inn recommended by Lunas and is relieved to find an affordable room. Exhausted from the forest and the journey, he finally has a safe place to sleep and organize everything that has happened. Another tutorial quest is completed when Ryoma successfully reaches Tuz, rewarding him with a surprisingly spacious storage bag. Although his inventory is already more useful, the ordinary-looking bag will help him blend in among local residents. The smartphone presents Ryoma's next tutorial objective: register with the Adventurers Guild. Excited that this world truly has the classic organization found in fantasy stories, he immediately prepares to visit it the following morning. Using the map function, Ryoma locates the guild and walks through Fales until the large building comes into view. The sight of it fills him with anticipation, because becoming an adventurer will give him both income and a reason to explore. Ryoma steps inside and is stunned by the crowded hall filled with armed adventurers of many races. The noisy atmosphere feels intimidating, but it also confirms that he has finally entered the center of the city's adventuring world. Ryoma unexpectedly reunites with Lunas, who is already registered at the guild. Hearing that Ryoma also wants to become an adventurer, Lunas offers to guide him through the process instead of leaving him to navigate it alone. At the reception counter, Renee welcomes Ryoma to the Fales branch of the Philande Kingdom's Adventurers Guild. She explains that registration begins by examining his status and skills with a special magical device. The device worries Ryoma because it may reveal that he is a demigod. Although he considers refusing, he realizes he cannot register without the examination and reluctantly places his hand near the glowing orb. The moment Ryoma touches the device, an intense light erupts through the guild hall. Everyone freezes as the ordinary registration procedure produces a reaction far beyond anything the staff expected. Renee panics after seeing the result and hurriedly asks Ryoma to follow her upstairs. Confused adventurers watch them leave, while Ryoma realizes that the device has almost certainly exposed his hidden race. Ryoma is brought before Gimmel, the guildmaster. Gimmel introduces himself calmly, but the private meeting and Renee's nervous behavior make it clear that Ryoma's registration has become an extremely serious matter. Gimmel confirms that the examination identified Ryoma's race as demigod. He explains that demigod describes Ryoma's divinely altered race, while apostle is the title given to a person formally chosen and marked by a god. Gimmel uses another magical test to verify the result. A powerful reaction fills the room, leaving no doubt that Ryoma possesses divine power and forcing everyone present to treat the discovery as genuine. Once the verification is complete, Renee becomes terrified and overly formal, repeatedly calling him Demigod-sama. Ryoma asks everyone to calm down, because their exaggerated fear is exactly the kind of attention he wanted to avoid. Gimel explains that a god's chosen apostle carries physical proof of the blessing somewhere on the body. Ryoma remembers receiving a message from Meshufim and realizes the strange marking near his shoulder may be that proof. The black symbol around Ryoma's shoulder blade is identified as Meshufim's divine mark. With both his demigod race and apostle title confirmed, the officials finally accept that the quiet newcomer is genuinely connected to a goddess. Renee eagerly asks to see the mark, but Gimel stops her and reminds her that Ryoma must partially undress. The awkward interruption briefly breaks the tension before the formal confirmation continues. Ryoma reveals the symbol, and Gimel recognizes it immediately as undeniable proof of a god's blessing. Ryoma apologizes for the unsightly situation, but the guild officials are far too overwhelmed by the significance of what they are seeing. Gimel formally welcomes Ryoma and announces that guild headquarters will prepare a special registration card for him. A normal guild card cannot properly represent an apostle, so the matter must be handled at the highest level. The guild master explains that the Adventurers Guild was founded thousands of years ago by Ryutaro Sumeragi, another divine apostle. To Ryoma's surprise, Sumeragi is still alive and continues serving as the guild's grand master. Ryoma receives a rainbow-colored personal guild card containing special functions unavailable to ordinary adventurers. One feature allows apostles to communicate, and the card immediately connects him to the legendary Grand Master. A small figure appears through the card and introduces himself as Emperor Ryutaru, Grand Master of the Guild. Ryoma is stunned that such an important and ancient demigod looks so young and casual. Ryutaru immediately recognizes Ryoma as the newest apostle and jokes that demigods truly are immortal. Ryoma struggles to respond normally while realizing he has just made contact with one of the most influential beings in the world. The two exchange introductions, and Ryutaro asks which goddess brought Ryoma to Mur. Ryoma names Meshufim, the goddess of games and pleasure, while Ryutaru welcomes him as a fellow apostle and future collaborator. Ryutaro explains that he founded the Adventurers Guild when the world was still chaotic. He organized adventurers to conquer dangerous dungeons, although Meshufim was apparently responsible for creating many of those troublesome places. After the brief conversation, Ryutaru leaves and Gimel completes Ryoma's registration. Renee is assigned to assist him whenever necessary, ensuring that the new apostle has a direct connection to the guild. When Ryoma returns downstairs, Lunas is worried because rumors are already spreading about the extraordinary newcomer taken upstairs. Ryoma assures him that everything is fine, though he knows keeping his identity quiet will now be difficult. For his first official job, Ryoma chooses a simple herb-gathering request. He wants to begin carefully, learn how guild work functions, and avoid drawing even more attention through an unnecessarily dangerous mission. Lunas explains that monster subjugation requests become available at higher guild ranks. One notable target is the Freda Vogel, a dangerous creature that Ryoma may eventually face once he has gained enough experience. Ryoma accepts the herb-gathering request at the counter. Lunas and Perme decide to accompany him, while other adventurers head out for a separate monster hunt. Their decision turns a routine beginner request into Ryoma's first real outing with companions he can trust. A notice identifying Ryoma as an apostle has already reached the guild staff. The first receptionist panics and hands the processing to the staff member assigned to assist him, making Ryoma realize the news has spread faster than expected. To process the request, the clerk asks for Ryoma's registration card. He worries that showing it will reveal his demigod status before he has explained anything to Lunas and Perme, but there is no way to continue without handing it over. The card is confirmed, and the staff formally wishes Apostle Ryoma success. The respectful announcement leaves his companions speechless, forcing the secret into the open before he can prepare a careful explanation. Ryoma expects Lunas and Perme to become distant now that they know he is a demigod. Their shocked expressions make him fear that his new friendships will end in the same disappointing way as his relationships in Japan. Instead, both companions declare that they already decided to help him and will stay until the end. Their immediate acceptance surprises Ryoma, and he gratefully places his trust in them for the upcoming request. Ryoma explains that although he is technically a demigod, He has only just arrived in Mur and remains inexperienced. He asks them to treat him normally, because he still does not understand many basic things about this world. The three begin their herb-gathering mission with renewed enthusiasm. After identifying the heart-shaped leaves they need, they spread out and carefully search the forest floor for enough plants to complete the request. Lunas warns Ryoma not to stare only at the ground, because monsters could ambush them. Gathering 11 herbs within 2 hours is already difficult, and losing awareness of the surroundings would make the task far more dangerous. A monster suddenly attacks before Ryoma can retrieve his sword from the inventory. Lunas reacts instantly and blocks the strike, protecting him, while the rest of the group realizes they have encountered something much stronger than expected. The attackers are Freda Vogel, the same monsters connected to a separate subjugation request. Surrounded and unable to retreat safely, the three adventurers understand that running is no longer an option. Perme remembers that Ryoma can use water magic and asks whether he can attack with it. Ryoma agrees, and the group decides to combine their abilities rather than face the pack individually. Lunas prepares wind magic to create an opening, while Ryoma concentrates on controlling his water spell. Remembering the destructive blast from the forest, Ryoma knows he must reduce its range so he does not strike his allies. Wind and water erupt together across the battlefield. The coordinated attack tears through the monsters, while Lunas and Perm hold their positions, allowing Ryoma to use his overwhelming power without catching either companion in the blast. The final Freda Vogel collapses, and the three confirm that the battle is over. Relief replaces the panic as they realize their improvised teamwork has successfully defeated a threat intended for more experienced adventurers. Lunas and Perme praise Ryoma's magic, calling it incredible. They also ask him to stop speaking so formally, because after fighting side by side, they no longer want him treating them like distant acquaintances. The two declare that anyone who battles together is a comrade. Ryoma finally accepts their friendship and agrees to speak casually, touched that they value him for who he is rather than for his divine race. After reporting the request, the group thanks one another for the day. Lunas and Perm say they will often be at the guild while adventuring around fails, so Ryoma can contact them whenever he needs help. The successful request completes another tutorial objective, awarding Ryoma God points and the magic recovery skill. A new tutorial directs him toward the church, while the rewards continue expanding the abilities available through his smartphone. Using search, Ryoma learns that apostles gather faith by performing great deeds and receiving recognition from the world. Increasing divinity strengthens their abilities and may eventually allow them to reach full godhood, a possibility he finds difficult to comprehend. Unsure how worship works in Mur, Ryoma visits the church and imitates the prayers he has seen others perform. He quietly calls out to Meshifim, hoping the goddess who brought him here will answer. The church suddenly transforms around Ryoma, and he finds himself standing in a vast divine space. Towering pillars and overwhelming light replace the ordinary sanctuary, proving that his prayer has connected directly to a god's domain. A childlike figure appears and cheerfully greets Ryoma by name. Despite the innocent appearance, Ryoma immediately senses that this must be Meshufim, the mysterious goddess responsible for bringing him into Mur. Ryoma cautiously asks whether the child before him is truly Meshufim. The cheerful figure confirms it, revealing that the goddess of games and pleasure has chosen an unexpectedly young appearance for their first face-to-face meeting. Ryoma asks why Meshufim brought him to Mur. Meshufim simply reminds him that he wished to come and explains that the divine purpose is not complicated. The goddess wants Ryoma to enjoy this world as freely as possible. Meshufim warmly tells Ryoma to experience Mur to the fullest and promises to watch over him. After delivering that encouragement, the goddess ends the meeting, leaving Ryoma with a far more personal understanding of his divine patron. Ryoma suddenly returns to the church, exactly where he had been praying. The transition is so seamless that the magnificent divine realm feels almost unreal. Yet the memory of speaking with Meshufim remains perfectly clear. Remembering Meshufim's command to enjoy himself, Ryoma feels reassured, although he cannot shake the sensation that the goddess is still observing him. He leaves the church, determined to stop overthinking every consequence of his new status. With every tutorial objective finally completed, Ryoma prepares to collect the accumulated rewards. His smartphone suddenly changes shape and vanishes from his hand, startling him until he realizes the system has received a major update. Ryoma discovers that the smartphone can now be summoned or stored simply by focusing on it, eliminating the risk of losing it. New rewards and daily quests also appear, showing that the tutorials were only preparation for the system's real functions. Now that the tutorial phase is over, Ryoma decides to fully embrace his otherworld adventure. His first daily objective requires defeating 5 monsters, so he plans to accept a subjugation request and test his growing abilities in actual combat. Ryoma easily defeats goblins, but dismantling their bodies and removing the magic stones is far more unpleasant than the fight itself. He reluctantly continues because those stones are required as proof that the guild request was completed. A scream for help interrupts Ryoma's work. Spotting someone under attack deeper in the forest, he abandons the goblin corpses and rushes toward the danger before the victim can be overwhelmed. Ryoma drives away the monsters and finds a badly injured young adventurer. Remembering the healing potion stored in his inventory, he quickly takes one out and checks whether the wounded boy is still conscious. Ryoma supports the injured adventurer and makes him drink the potion. The medicine immediately begins closing the wounds, allowing the boy to breathe normally again after coming dangerously close to death. Once recovered, the adventurer introduces himself as Ruin, a rookie like Ryoma. Ruin repeatedly thanks him for saving his life, while Ryoma downplays the rescue and introduces himself without demanding anything in return. Ruin insists that Ryoma is his lifesaver and begs for a chance to repay him. Ryoma initially refuses, but when Ruin offers to do anything he needs, an idea connected to the new daily quests comes to mind. Ryoma asks Ruin to play a game with him. The request seems strange, but it gives Ryoma a perfect opportunity to complete a quest while testing the Game Master ability he recently received from Mishufem. The smartphone explains that Game Master can govern any agreed game, control victory or defeat, detect cheating, and forcibly collect wagers. Ryoma immediately understands that the power is incredibly dangerous and must be used with restraint. For the first test, Ryoma proposes a simple coin toss and asks Ruin to choose heads or tails. Ruin selects heads, while Ryoma concentrates on the coin and the unfamiliar authority connected to the game. Although the coin initially lands on heads, Ryoma changes the result to tails through sheer intent. The impossible reversal confirms that Game Master allows him to control an outcome after the game has already begun. Ryoma continues experimenting by making Ruin win 5 times in a row. They add small wagers such as herbs and magic stones, allowing him to test both outcome manipulation and the system's automatic collection function. The wagered items transfer instantly to the winner, proving that Game Master can enforce a bet without physical exchange. Ryoma recognizes its convenience, but also realizes that careless use could make the ability frighteningly unfair. After completing their reports, Ruin invites Ryoma to share a meal at the inn. He explains that the food is good and the rooms are inexpensive, then suggests they share one to reduce the cost even further. Back at the inn, Ryoma collects his daily rewards and considers spending the new points on magical growth. Ruin notices the smartphone-like interface and asks whether it is some kind of rare magical item. Ryoma compares the device to the magical tool used at the guild and avoids revealing its divine origin. Hearing that useful items can be purchased with earned points, Ruin becomes excited about obtaining magical equipment of his own. Ryoma suggests that Ruin earn money through part-time work instead of waiting for a rare item. The ordinary phrase confuses Ruin at first, so Ryoma prepares to explain what kind of work he has in mind. Ruin proposes hunting goblins, while Ryoma handles the unpleasant extraction of their magic stones. They can sell the stones and divide the profit, essentially turning the arrangement into a private quest that benefits both of them. Ryoma agrees because Ruin needs better equipment, while the extra work will also help him gain experience. They schedule the hunt for the day after tomorrow and part ways, both looking forward to the cooperation. The next day, Ryoma uses his growing supply of god points to purchase earth, fire, and wind magic. As the new abilities settle into him, he feels his magical capacity increase and becomes eager to test the broader elemental arsenal. A new application called Fairy Garden catches Ryoma's attention. It resembles a mobile raising game, complete with an item shop, gacha system, and a tiny island that can apparently be developed over time. The first free summon gives Ryoma a male fairy king. He names the tiny creature Phonon, and although the fairy has no spoken response, its delighted movements show that it accepts both Ryoma and the new name. Phonon offers Ryoma herbs gathered from Fairy Island. Ryoma discovers that items can be transferred out of the application, meaning the seemingly harmless game may provide real materials and resources for life in Myr. Ryoma heads out to hunt goblins, while Ruin remains in town searching for manageable guild work. Using the smartphone's map and monster location function, Ryoma identifies a large cluster outside the city and follows it toward the forest. The signal leads Ryoma to an entire goblin nest. Although there are many enemies, each individual appears weak, so he decides to attack the settlement at once and use the opportunity to test his newly purchased magic. As Ryoma approaches, the goblins notice him and surge forward from the nest. He remains calm, gathers magical power, and prepares to strike before the horde can surround him. The moment marks the beginning of a direct battle against the entire settlement rather than a single scouting encounter. Ryoma bombards the charging goblins with repeated elemental attacks. Explosions and projectiles tear through the nest, but a larger evolved goblin emerges among them, proving that the settlement contains a more dangerous leader. The stronger monster refuses to fall easily and counters Ryoma's attacks. Rather than retreat, Ryoma continues switching spells and pressing the advantage, determined to defeat the nest without allowing any goblins to escape. After the final strike, Ryoma confirms that the battle is over. He stores the bodies in his inventory for later dismantling, avoiding the exhausting work while still inside hostile territory. Search identifies the larger enemy as a hobgoblin, an evolved goblin that might have transformed into something even worse if the nest had remained untouched. Ryoma decides to purify the area with a new divine ability. Ryoma releases divine magic over the ruined nest. Brilliant holy light spreads across the entire battlefield, washing away the corruption left by the monsters and transforming the devastated clearing into a purified space. The system describes divine magic as a god-level power capable of healing wounds, curing illness, blocking attacks, and creating sanctuaries that monsters cannot approach. Ryoma realizes he has gained an ability far beyond ordinary elemental spells. The purified zone becomes a sanctuary, and even the air feels cleaner. Completing the quest rewards Ryoma with psychokinesis, which he immediately decides to test rather than waiting until he returns to town. Ryoma learns that psychokinesis works by wrapping magical power around an object. He focuses on a nearby item, lifts it from the ground, and carefully adjusts the invisible force until it floats under his control. Once he understands the technique, Ryoma begins moving objects freely through the air. Controlling a sword in mid-air feels especially exciting, and he briefly forgets his caution while enjoying how much the ability resembles fantasy magic. The following day, Ryoma and Ruin begin dismantling the stored monsters. A magical tool makes the work easier, but the enormous pile leaves them shocked, so they divide the labor and settle in for a long session. Ruin recognizes the hobgoblin corpse and is amazed that Ryoma destroyed an entire goblin nest alone. The discovery makes Ryoma's supposedly ordinary rank and limited experience seem increasingly unbelievable. His companions can no longer dismiss his strength as luck after seeing the proof lying directly before them. Ryoma insists that he only kept his distance and used magic, but Ruin still considers the achievement extraordinary. Seeing that his companion is hungry, Ryoma shares berries from the fairy garden before they finish the remaining work. The completed materials sell for 2,182 binas, giving both adventurers a satisfying payment. Ruin celebrates that he can finally improve his gear, while Ryoma is pleased that their improvised partnership succeeded. Before they leave, Gimmel asks Ryoma for a private conversation. The guild master's serious expression immediately changes the mood, and Ryoma sends Ruin back to the inn while he hears the urgent news. Gimmel reveals that a royal messenger has arrived from King Luiro of Philande. The king has learned about the new apostle and wants an official meeting, placing Ryoma in a political situation he never expected. Ryoma is horrified that the king sent an envoy specifically for him. Gimel explains that a demigod technically holds a position above even royalty, meaning refusing the summons could create a major diplomatic incident. Although Ryoma hates the attention, he intends to keep living in Falande and does not want unnecessary conflict with its ruler. He reluctantly concludes that meeting the envoy is the safest and most respectful choice. Gimel schedules the audience for the afternoon after tomorrow and promises to handle the arrangements. Ryoma asks for time to prepare, realizing that his peaceful adventure has suddenly turned into a formal royal affair. Back at the inn, Ryoma learns that Ruin has reserved another shared room for them. Ruin's thoughtfulness gives him a place to rest and quietly plan for the upcoming meeting, without dealing with the problem alone. Ruin asks why the guild master treats Ryoma so differently. Since hiding the truth is no longer practical, Ryoma decides to explain that he is the newly arrived apostle everyone in the city has been discussing. Ruin is stunned to discover that his lifesaver is the famous apostle Ryoma. Ryoma asks him not to become formal or distant, insisting that the divine title changes nothing about the friendship they already formed. Ryoma tells Ruin to stop using honorifics and call him by name, because being treated like a stranger would feel lonely. Ruin finally agrees, easing Ryoma's fear that revealing his race will always destroy ordinary relationships. The two visit a weapon shop so Ruin can spend his earnings. Ruin excitedly examines the enormous selection and asks Ryoma for advice, while Ryoma admits that fantasy equipment is fascinating, even though he lacks professional knowledge. Ruin debates between several weapons and asks which one looks best. Ryoma carefully compares the options, trying to give practical advice instead of choosing purely because a sword looks impressive. A third adventurer named Roma joins the discussion after hearing Ruin mention broken equipment from an orc fight. Ruin introduces Ryoma and Roma properly, and Ryoma is asked to help compare defensive gear as well as weapons. Ryoma recommends a round shield for stronger defense or iron bracers for greater mobility. Ruin chooses the shield, while Ryoma notices that Roma's bracers are badly worn and may fail in the next battle. As thanks for the weapon advice, Ryoma buys Roma a reliable pair of replacement bracers and offers them as a gift. Roma protests that they are too expensive, but Ryoma insists that dependable equipment matters more than preserving his money. Ryoma also gives Ruin healing potions and asks him to use them properly. With the shopping finished, the group decides to eat together, and Perme is invited to join them at a highly recommended restaurant. The restaurant is far more elegant than Ryoma expected, making him slightly nervous. He is especially curious about the menu, because most food he has encountered in Mur has been simple grilled meat with uncertain origins. Roma explains that the restaurant's sophisticated dishes were created through the influence of Hana Higuchi, another apostle. By introducing new cooking techniques, she built great wealth and permanently changed the region's cuisine. A spectacular spread arrives at the table. The familiar presentation immediately reminds Ryoma of food from Japan, and the group stares in amazement before eagerly beginning the meal. The meal becomes another reminder that this world can recreate comforting memories of home in unexpected forms. Ryoma tastes Hamburg steak and a sandwich, astonished by how tender and delicious the meat is. Finding recognizable comfort food in another world makes the meal feel especially precious after weeks of unfamiliar dishes. The pasta is equally impressive, and the group gratefully praises Apostle Hana for bringing such cuisine to Mur. Ryoma wishes peaceful moments like this could continue, surrounded by friends rather than danger or ceremony. During the meal, the companions discuss forming a more stable party. They believe their abilities can cover one another's weaknesses, though Ryoma cautions everyone not to overwork or take risks beyond their current level. The invitation is warmly accepted, and Ryoma is moved by how naturally the others include him. Their concern and enthusiasm make this gathering feel like the kind of friendship he never managed to build in his old life. The conversation turns to sacred healing magic. Ryoma learns that ordinary holy magic can heal injuries and resist curses, while his own divine magic is an apostle-level form capable of curing illness, creating sanctuaries, summoning sacred beings, and perhaps even restoring the dead. When they return to the Adventurers Guild, people immediately recognize Ryoma from the rumors. The group settles the restaurant bill and prepares to separate, while Ryoma continues adjusting to being watched everywhere he goes. Ryoma apologizes for hiding his apostle identity and causing his new friends to worry about the guild's unusual treatment of him. They are not angry, but ask him to tell them sooner when something serious happens. And they plan another meal together. The group parts with encouragement and promises to meet again. Ryoma's companions will continue searching for suitable requests, while he turns his attention toward the royal meeting scheduled for the following day. After spending time with his friends, Ryoma feels much calmer about the audience. Their ordinary conversation relieves the pressure, allowing him to approach the intimidating political event without being consumed by anxiety. The next day, Ryoma is dressed in a formal outfit, prepared specifically for the meeting. He thanks everyone for the help, confirms that the clothes fit, and gathers his courage before leaving to face the king's representatives. Ryoma arrives at the Grand Parliament building, where the audience will take place. Places. The massive structure and strict atmosphere immediately remind him that this is no longer a casual guild matter, but an official state occasion. A long line of attendants and officials welcomes Ryoma as soon as he enters. Their synchronized greeting overwhelms him, making the supposedly respectful reception feel more intimidating than the monsters he has fought. Gallo introduces himself as Ryoma's guide and addresses him with extreme reverence. He explains that a divine apostle is honored above even the king, which is why every person in the building treats Ryoma so formally. Inside the meeting chamber, the delegation introduces its leaders. Geifor of the House of Marquis Soil and Sanamaru, head of the royal representatives. Each man emphasizes the kingdom's gratitude for receiving an audience with the apostle. Gimel and Renee formally identify themselves before Ryoma's turn arrives. Ryoma introduces himself as one blessed by Mishufim, trying to maintain composure while every official studies the newly descended apostle. The delegation reads King Luiro's message, declaring that Philande is deeply honored by Ryoma's presence. The king offers sincere respect and invites him to visit the royal capital when he is ready. Several valuable gifts from the king are presented to Ryoma. Although he questions whether he should accept so much, the officials insist that refusing would dishonor the goodwill behind the royal offering. The collection includes herbs from Fairy Island, leaves and branches from a world tree sapling, and a powerful fairy healing potion. Ryoma is stunned because every item is described as a national-level treasure. Ryoma expresses gratitude for King Luiro's welcome and promises to visit the capital. He also prepares a gift of his own, asking the delegation to deliver it safely as proof that he accepts the king's French. After the exhausting audience, Ryoma finally relaxes in a waiting room. He asks about the parchment included with the royal gifts, curious why the document appears more important than an ordinary letter. The parchment grants Ryoma ownership of a mansion in the capital, rights to another estate, and permission to operate a magical airship. It also contains a formal non-hostility agreement, recognizing him as a divine apostle. Gimel explains that Philande has effectively chosen to share its fate with Ryoma and support him against hostile forces. The scale of that commitment frightens him, because he never intended to carry responsibility for an entire kingdom. A message from Mishufim reminds Ryoma not to overthink the arrangement. The goddess's blessing prevents others from condemning or violating him, so Ryoma is told to continue enjoying myrrh freely while still appreciating the kingdom's sincerity. With the formal business finished, the group prepares to leave. Ryoma mentions that he has another destination in mind, determined to establish a practical base, rather than remain dependent on inns and temporary rooms. Using the money received from the king, Ryoma visits the commercial guild. Chairman Maruni welcomes the famous apostle and offers to help him purchase property suitable for operating within Fales. Maruni explains that information is essential to every merchant and asks what Ryoma needs. Ryoma requests land, a large house, and the materials necessary to manage the property within a reasonable budget. Several options are presented, But Ryoma chooses a 3-story house with a garden, basement, and more than 20 rooms. The property satisfies every condition and is affordable enough that he can buy it immediately. Ryoma also arranges to hire 2 men and 2 women as household staff. He approves generous wages and asks the guild to handle the contracts, preferring reliable support over trying to maintain the enormous home alone. Maruni personally guides Ryoma to the property. The mansion is far larger and more elegant than he imagined, and he can only stare in disbelief when told that this impressive residence now belongs to him. The interior is spotless and carefully maintained. Ryoma is delighted with the rooms and garden, while Maruni proudly explains that the commercial guild keeps every managed property in excellent condition. Ryoma designates the mansion as a teleport gate destination, allowing him to return instantly from other locations. The ability will make the house a perfect base, although he knows teleportation must be used carefully to avoid exposing the secret. The next morning, the 4 contracted servants arrive: Wellnon, Giones, Ruameria, and Miana. They introduce themselves politely, confirm the employment conditions, and sign strict agreements protecting Ryoma's private information. By completing the contracts, the new household officially gains a trusted team capable of managing Ryoma's rapidly expanding responsibilities. The staff studies the mansion's layout and receives a detailed daily schedule covering meals, shopping, cleaning, and other duties. Ryoma is impressed by how professionally they organize the household from the very first day. Ryoma tells everyone to rest whenever they feel unwell and never sacrifice their health for work. At the same time, he jokingly warns them not to use kindness as an excuse for laziness, establishing a fair but relaxed relationship. Once the servants begin working, Ryoma finally takes a breather. Grateful that the mansion is in capable hands, he checks Fairy Garden and the smartphone's new quests, ready to return his attention to adventure. A new challenge leads Ryoma toward a dungeon connected to Meishufim. Although the idea is dangerous, the promise of exploration and divine rewards excites him, and he decides to take on the dungeon without hesitation. With everyone at the mansion informed of his outing, Ryoma finally sets off under clear skies. Excited to test the mysterious dungeon for himself, he heads out with the confidence of someone expecting a simple day of exploration, unaware that the trip will soon lead him into far more trouble than anticipated. Ryoma arrives at what appears to be the dungeon entrance, a large cave surrounded by adventurers constantly coming and going. Seeing how ordinary the place looks from outside, he confirms that this must be the dungeon and prepares to enter among the other explorers. The moment Ryoma enters, a message from Meishufim welcomes him to the dungeon she created. She explains that it uses a modified environment from a collapsed world to generate monsters, items, and materials. The concept sounds absurdly powerful, so Ryoma decides not to overthink it and simply enjoy exploring. Inside the dungeon, Ryoma begins with the most basic part of any expedition, carefully exploring the unfamiliar passages. He advances through the dim cave while studying his surroundings, until the first monster finally appears and gives him a chance to test how this artificial dungeon works. Ryoma defeats the approaching monster without difficulty and discovers another convenient feature of the dungeon. Defeated creatures leave usable materials without requiring dismantling. Pleased by the efficient system, he collects the drops and continues deeper, eager to gather more resources along the way. After steadily collecting materials and making good progress, Ryoma notices something unusual lying farther ahead. When he moves closer, he realizes, with horror, that it is not another monster or dropped item, but what appears to be a human corpse abandoned inside the dungeon. The sight of the corpse completely destroys Ryoma's composure. He screams, retreats in panic, and decides he has had enough exploration for one day. Unfortunately, after running blindly through the passages, he realizes he can no longer find the route back to the entrance. Still frightened and hopelessly lost, Ryoma searches for any path that might lead outside. Just when the dungeon begins to feel inescapable, he spots another group of adventurers nearby and rushes toward them, hoping they can guide him back to safety. Ryoma politely asks the adventurer party for directions to the exit, but they are more shocked by his equipment than his request. Seeing him inside a dungeon wearing such light armor, they scold him for taking a reckless risk. Ryoma admits this is his first dungeon and that he is still a beginner. Fortunately, the party is already preparing to return and agrees to guide Ryoma because they have a map. Hearing that word reminds him of the map application he already possesses, leaving him embarrassed that he panicked for so long without remembering such an obvious solution. The adventurers introduce themselves as Shion, Seldion, and Ryord. Ryoma gives his own name and gratefully joins their return trip, admitting that wandering alone had become frightening. The friendly party accepts the inexperienced-looking newcomer without realizing how unusual his true abilities are. To repay Ryoma's help, the group offers him gold coins, following their family belief that kindness should always be returned. During the conversation, Ryoma learns that Ryord's sister suffers from an illness that is slowly turning her eyes black and will eventually take her sight, while the medicine that delays it is extremely expensive. The others explain that Ryord became an adventurer despite the danger because he desperately needs money for his sick sister. Having lost his parents young, he relies heavily on those around him, and his companions could not bear to let him face that burden alone. Now they are helping him just as his family once helped them. Ryord's story reminds Ryoma of his own childhood. Although he was an only child, his friend Takefumi had an older sister who often played with him, protected him, and treated him like a younger brother. Ryoma had always looked up to her as the older sister he never had. That memory makes Ryord's situation impossible for Ryoma to ignore. Thinking of Azusa, the sister figure from his former life, he resolves to save the suffering girl even if revealing part of his demigod nature risks exposing the secret he has tried to protect. When Ryoma asks about curing the illness, the party explains that even clerics have been unable to treat it. They question how he could possibly succeed where trained healers failed. Before answering, Ryoma asks everyone to promise that they will keep what he is about to reveal completely secret. As Ryoma begins revealing his identity, the mood changes immediately. One companion recognizes the sacred significance of the person standing before them and orders everyone to bow, declaring that Ryoma is an apostle, a divine being positioned at the very pinnacle of all species. Embarrassed by their sudden formality, Ryoma urges everyone to stand and behave normally. The party realizes that an apostle may possess magic capable of curing otherwise incurable illnesses and asks whether he can truly save the girl. Ryoma admits that this will be his first attempt at healing a disease, but he is willing to try. Seldion apologizes for his earlier rudeness and earnestly begs Ryoma to save Ryord's sister, Mizari. Ryoma agrees to make the attempt, and Ryord immediately leads him home, excitedly announcing that he has brought someone extraordinary who might finally help her. At Ryord's home, Ryoma introduces himself to Mizari and explains why he has come. She calmly rejects the hope of a cure, saying that no one can heal her condition and even the medicine costs an unreasonable amount. Having already accepted her fate, she does not want her brother chasing impossible promises. Ryord's companions remind Mizari that her brother has worked himself to exhaustion for her sake and beg her to trust him. Ryoma explains that the gods granted him a special power and promises to use it to treat her illness. Though uncertain, Mizari finally agrees to place her faith in him. Ryoma begins the treatment by invoking his sacred power over Mizari. Brilliant divine light gathers around her body, filling the room as the magic reaches into the illness that ordinary medicine and clerical healing could never remove. The sacred light intensifies and completely envelops Mizari. Ryoma carefully maintains the spell until the dark affliction is purified, while everyone nearby watches in breathless silence, afraid to interrupt the miracle unfolding before them. As the light fades, Mizari realizes that her vision is returning. She can see Ryord's face clearly and notices how much stronger he has grown while fighting for her. The family breaks down in joy when it becomes undeniable that the supposedly incurable illness has truly vanished. Ryoma is relieved that the treatment succeeded, but he refuses to treat the miracle as a transaction. He explains that he expected nothing in return and acted only for his own satisfaction. Seeing the siblings reunited and genuinely happy makes him realize how rewarding it feels to use his power for someone else. Mizari and the others repeatedly thank Ryoma and insist on repaying him with anything within their ability. He declines, prepares to leave, and says that their happiness is enough. Even so, the grateful family cannot accept letting such an enormous kindness end without someday returning it. 3 days later, Mizari remains completely healthy with no side effects or relapse from the sacred magic. Ryoma tells the family to contact him through the guild if anything changes. He also reports his new house and dungeon visit to the guild, while deliberately omitting the embarrassing fact that he became lost inside. News of Ryoma being an apostle attracts people who want to approach him for personal reasons, so he gratefully lets the guild handle most of them. Determined to repay that support someday, he checks his daily quests and notices that the Fairy Garden application has prepared something new. An emergency quest suddenly appears, warning Ryoma about an approaching wyvern. On his map, a red marker is moving directly toward Fails, and the countdown seems to show the time remaining before the monster reaches the region. Realizing the danger is immediate, he stops everything else. Ryoma rushes to the guild to report the emergency and ask Gimel for help. He bursts into the office, then notices that Gimel is speaking with another customer. Even so, the threat is too serious to delay, so Ryoma urgently explains that something terrible is approaching. Ryoma tells Gimel that a wyvern is heading toward the town. Gimel immediately understands that this is no ordinary matter, but the other visitor questions how Ryoma could know such precise information and asks who the young man actually is. Gimel introduces Ryoma as the Apostle, whose rumors have already spread throughout the region. The visitor then introduces himself as Wanan, a celebrated hero. Both are surprised to meet another person carrying an extraordinary title, and the emergency brings them together without ceremony. Wanan asks whether Ryoma is tracking the wyverns through an apostle's power. Ryoma confirms it and explains that 5 creatures are approaching. According to the map, they will reach the threatened area in roughly 5 days, giving the group only a narrow window to respond. Using Ryoma's map, they determine that the wyverns are advancing from the west during the season when they seek food before laying eggs. Their route will take them through the town of Futsuu before they reach Fails, meaning the smaller settlement will be devastated first unless someone intervenes. The distance is too great for Ryoma's teleportation gate, and even the fastest horse will require about 2 days to reach Futsuu. With the wyverns moving quickly, there is no guarantee they will arrive in time. Still, neither Ryoma nor Wanan can ignore an attack they know is coming, so they decide to confront the monsters. Wanan believes the combined strength of a hero and an apostle gives them a real chance of defeating the wyverns. Ryoma thanks him for joining the dangerous mission. But Wanan answers that protecting innocent people is something he could never overlook either. Gimel immediately arranges horses and sends requests to adventurers for reinforcements. Before Ryoma and Wanan depart, he asks about the mysterious black display Ryoma used to track the monsters. Ryoma vaguely describes it as one of his apostle abilities, avoiding a complicated explanation of the map application. During their journey, Wanan admits that he has heard apostles possess unusual powers and finds Ryoma's abilities fascinating. Ryoma, in turn, asks what the title hero actually means. Wanan explains that humans who surpass the normal level limit and evolve into high humans are recognized as heroes. Wanan reveals that his level is around 130, astonishing Ryoma. When Ryoma comments on how young he looks, Wanan casually explains that he is actually 84 years old. Becoming a high human greatly slows aging, so his appearance has changed very little for decades. Wanan adds that high humans can live for several hundred years, meaning he is still considered young among his kind. Ryoma compares that achievement with his own sudden evolution into a demigod, and feels even more impressed. Because heroes reach their higher form through personal effort and strength, Wanan humbly insists that Ryoma is far more remarkable, while Ryoma admits he is still inexperienced and hopes to learn from people like him. Their conversation ends as they finally approach Futsuu, where terrified residents are already being ordered away from the danger. At Futsuu, a guard warns everyone that wyverns have appeared inside the town and urges civilians to retreat. Despite receiving advance notice and fortifying their defenses, the residents could not withstand the attack. Even the sturdy building used as a shelter has been destroyed. Ryoma and Wanan declare that they have come to defeat the monsters. The two rescuers enter the ruined town and immediately realize they arrived too late to prevent the first wave of destruction. Smoke, shattered buildings, and terrified survivors surround them, but there is no time to grieve while the wyverns are still attacking. Cries for help echo through Futsuu as the monsters continue rampaging. Ryoma and Wanan push into the chaos, directing survivors to escape while preparing to draw the wyverns away from the remaining civilians and buildings. Ryoma refuses to let the wyverns destroy anything else. Standing beside Wanan, he converts all of his accumulated god points into magical power, accepting the enormous cost because protecting the town requires strength far beyond an ordinary spell. With a demigod and a hero fighting together, the real battle begins. Ryoma and Wanan launch themselves against the 5 wyverns, determined to stop the creatures here before they can advance any farther or claim more lives. The wyverns retaliate violently, and the fighting spreads across the damaged streets. Ryoma remains alert to the civilians still trapped nearby, warning people to move away as enormous attacks tear through the area in front of him. Ryoma unleashes overwhelming magic against the airborne monsters. The battlefield fills with explosive force and swirling energy as he drives the wyverns away from the civilians, creating an opening for Wanan to attack. Wanan admits that Ryoma initially seemed unreliable. But the Apostle's true power changes his opinion completely. Even the force of Ryoma's roar and magical pressure shakes the battlefield, proving that the young-looking traveler is anything but ordinary. Ryoma and Wanan succeed in drawing the wyverns outside the town. With the monsters now away from the densest group of survivors, they can fight more freely and reduce the risk of causing additional damage to Futsuu's remaining buildings. Wanan fires at a fleeing wyvern but narrowly misses. Refusing to let the creature escape and threaten another settlement, he immediately gives chase while Ryoma continues controlling the rest of the battlefield. Ryoma creates a massive barrier of wind around the combat zone. The spell protects Futsuu while restricting the wyvern's movement, trapping them within a limited area where he and Wanan can attack without allowing the creatures to return to the town. Their coordinated assault brings down 2 wyverns. Encouraged by the rapid success, Ryoma and Wanan press forward, determined to maintain their momentum and eliminate the remaining monsters before the situation changes. The surviving wyverns become cautious and refuse to descend into attack range. Half a day passes while they circle beyond the fighter's strongest strikes, forcing Ryoma to maintain the exhausting barrier and turning the battle into a prolonged stalemate. Maintaining the barrier prevents Ryoma from using his most powerful offensive magic, but releasing it would expose Futsuu to another attack. As his strength begins to strain, he notices the wyverns reacting to something outside the barrier and wonders whether another force is approaching. Ryoma checks the map and confirms a new presence beyond the barrier, likely the reinforcements Gimel dispatched. Since he cannot sustain the spell forever, he and Wanan decide to lower it at the right moment and coordinate with the arriving adventurers, despite the risk of briefly exposing the town. The barrier opens, and the waiting reinforcements charge into the battle. Their arrival divides the wyverns' attention, giving Ryoma and Wanan the opportunity they need to resume their attack from another direction. The first assault fails to bring the monster down, but it creates a decisive opening. Ryoma immediately channels another powerful strike into the exposed wyvern, refusing to let the brief chance disappear. One more wyvern falls, and another is injured so badly that it can no longer fly. Victory appears close. But Ryoma relaxes for a fraction of a second and realizes too late that he has become careless, while the final monster is still capable of attacking. The last wyvern launches a sudden counterattack at close range. Ryoma is caught in the violent impact before he can fully defend himself, and the battlefield erupts around him as his companions react in alarm. Wanan and the reinforcements answer the attack with everything they have. Their combined strikes overwhelm the remaining wyvern, preventing it from exploiting Ryoma's momentary vulnerability and bringing the desperate battle toward its conclusion. At last, the final wyvern collapses. The immediate threat is over, but the silence that follows feels heavier than victory, because the fighters can now see the full scale of the destruction that occurred before and during the battle. Ryoma looks across Futsuu's ruined streets, and is shaken by what remains. Buildings lie shattered, smoke rises from the wreckage, and countless lives have already been lost despite their efforts to arrive and fight as quickly as possible. Although all 5 wyverns have been defeated, Ryoma knows the dead cannot be restored by simply winning the battle. He prays that the victims can rest peacefully, and that those left behind will find enough strength to continue living after such an overwhelming tragedy. Ryoma moves among the survivors and the fallen, unable to accept ending his work with only the monsters defeated. Gathering his remaining sacred power, he begins a prayer for everyone affected by the disaster. Warm divine light spreads across the devastated town. The wounded are enveloped by Ryoma's power, while the atmosphere around the dead changes as if his prayer is reaching beyond the physical world itself. The souls of the deceased appear as lights rising gently toward the heavens. Witnessing the impossible scene, the survivors call out to Ryoma in awe, realizing that the young man before them truly possesses power connected to the gods. The event later becomes known as the miracle of Futsuu. Ryoma's healing and the visible ascension of the victims' souls spread through public memory, marking the moment when his identity as an apostle could no longer remain a secret known only to a few people. After exhausting himself, Ryoma awakens inside a temporary recovery space created by Meshufim and slowly remembers what happened. He and Wanan defeated the wyverns, but the final use of sacred power over the entire town drained him so completely that he lost consciousness. Meshufim greets Ryoma after he wakes, and Mayor Loden of Futsuu sincerely thanks him for saving the town. Although Ryoma still feels disoriented, he is surprised to find himself refreshed rather than injured after resting in the goddess's protected recovery space. Ryoma asks about Futsuu and receives a devastating report. Half of the town's population died during the attack, and roughly 70% of its buildings were destroyed. The victory prevented total annihilation, but the surviving community has paid an unbearable price. There is also hopeful news. Every injured survivor has fully recovered because of Ryoma's miracle. More importantly, those who remain are now filled with an unusually strong will to live and rebuild. Mayor Loden believes that determination will allow Futsuu to move forward despite its losses. The mayor asks Ryoma to rest and postpone further discussion until tomorrow. Everyone in Futsuu now knows about the miracle and his identity as an apostle, so appearing outside would immediately cause a commotion. Realizing the secret is already gone, Ryoma reluctantly agrees to remain quiet for the day. Wanan prepares to return to the royal capital and tells Ryoma it was an honor to fight beside him. Ryoma praises the hero's strength, humility, and reliability, while Wanan invites him to call for help if another crisis occurs. They part hoping that their paths will cross again. After the emergency ends, Ryoma remembers that he still needs to claim the quest reward. The large amount of God points gives him enough currency to consider installing another application, and a newly available library app immediately catches his attention. Ryoma excitedly imagines using the library to read manga and light novels from Earth. Instead, he finds only magical texts, history books, and alchemy references from the New World. Learning that the entertainment he wants may exist elsewhere only makes the limited collection feel even more unfair. Meshufim recommends an application called Personal Space, but activating it costs an astonishing 10,000 God points. Ryoma feels as though he is being manipulated into spending his reward, yet curiosity wins. Having already come this far, he reluctantly confirms the expensive installation. The personal space opens into a dimensional room, and Ryoma steps through the entrance with no idea what to expect. The interior immediately feels strangely familiar, as though the application has recreated a place connected to his former life. Inside, Ryoma discovers shelves filled with light novels and manga, along with anime Blu-ray collections. The sight of so much entertainment from Earth overwhelms him, especially after he had just assumed such things were permanently beyond his reach. Ryoma realizes that the room is an exact copy of his old bedroom. Meshufim explains that she created this unique dimensional space by reproducing his room and belongings, presenting it as a reward for all the effort and danger he has endured. Time inside the personal space flows differently. 7 full days pass there while only a moment passes outside. Meshufim encourages Ryoma to forget his responsibilities temporarily and enjoy himself. Delighted by the perfect retreat, he dives into his old hobbies without restraint. After spending 7 days reading and relaxing, Ryoma finally feels satisfied and returns to help rebuild Futsuu. He offers to cover construction and maintenance expenses and asks that the recovery plan include an orphanage for children who lost their families in the attack. Supplies begin arriving from nearby towns, and the number of volunteers grows each day. With reconstruction progressing faster than expected, Mayor Loden approaches Ryoma to introduce important visitors who have come to support Futsuu's recovery. 2 representatives named Azan and Lowell arrive from the Holy Church, an organization that worships all gods. They respectfully request an audience with Ryoma and declare themselves honored to stand before an apostle. Treating him with the formal reverence he still finds uncomfortable. The church representatives pray for the victims and offer material support and public service to stabilize the survivors' lives. They also request permission to build a church in Futsuu, at the place where Ryoma used his miraculous power, turning the devastated town into a recognized sacred site. Ryoma has no objection, and Mayor Loden strongly supports the proposal. A church associated with the apostle's miracle could attract new residents and visitors, bringing money and labor that would accelerate Futsuu's recovery. With everyone in agreement, construction begins immediately. 1 month later, the new church is complete. After the Holy Church publicly declares Futsuu a sanctuary connected to Apostle Ryoma, residents and tourists pour into the region. The sudden growth restores the town far more quickly than anyone expected, and Futsuu rises from the disaster. Ryoma's reputation creates a different kind of problem. Wherever he goes, people beg him to pat their children, accept vegetables, eat at their homes, or grant blessings. Unable to satisfy everyone, he apologetically limits how many requests he will accept each day. The crowds eventually follow Ryoma all the way to his mansion in Fales. With people waiting outside every day, living an ordinary life becomes impossible. Realizing that rumors have spread much farther than expected, he decides to travel somewhere his face is not yet widely recognized. Ryoma chooses the royal capital, San Angares, partly because the king previously summoned him, and Wanan has returned there. He leaves money for the mansion's living and maintenance expenses, entrusts the household to his servants, and announces that he will be away for some time. To avoid attracting another crowd, Ryoma leaves before sunrise. He plans to ask Gimel to handle any problems caused by his sudden departure and skips lengthy farewells, believing he can visit everyone again soon. With that, he begins the long journey toward San Angares. Even as Ryoma departs, travelers across the region exchange stories about Apostle Ryoma and the miracles performed in Fales and Futsuu. People wonder where he will appear next, unaware that the famous apostle is already trying to pass through their towns without being recognized. After rushing away without proper planning, Ryoma realizes the capital is much farther than he imagined and regrets not borrowing a horse. Then he remembers receiving a flight skill as a reward. Curious whether it can solve the problem, he decides to test it while traveling. Ryoma focuses on the sensation of flying and activates the skill. His body rises from the ground far more easily than expected, and he shoots upward with a mixture of excitement and panic while learning how to control himself in mid-air. Once he stabilizes, Ryoma discovers that flying feels incredible. He enjoys the freedom and speed as he crosses the landscape, deciding to use the skill to approach the next town quickly without exhausting himself on the road. Ryoma reaches the town of Arga and decides to stay for the night. To his surprise, every respectable inn is completely full, despite the town not being a major tourist destination. While he wonders what caused the sudden crowd, a stranger notices that he is searching for lodging. The stranger explains that more travelers have been passing through because of rumors about an apostle and a newly recognized sanctuary. Ryoma realizes that his own actions are indirectly responsible for the lack of rooms, making his attempt to escape public attention even more ironic. The stranger offers to guide him to a cheaper inn. Worried that using his real name might expose him, Ryoma introduces himself as Taro. The guide finds the name unusual, but leads him through the town to a modest establishment with space available. Inside the inn, other guests enthusiastically discuss Apostle Ryoma. They claim he saved a town from wyverns, turned it into a sanctuary, and can heal any injury or illness. Ryoma quietly listens as the rumors exaggerate his abilities, hoping no one connects the supposed miracle worker with the traveler beside them. The cheap room smells strongly of mold, so Ryoma cleans it with purification magic before settling down. He checks his daily quests and finds a mission involving abnormal breeding: destroy an orc nest. Since it lies along the route to the capital, he decides it may be worth handling on the way. The orc nest quest offers god points and a large amount of premium augeru meat. Curious about whether the reward tastes as impressive as it sounds, Ryoma decides to hunt the monsters while gaining more experience. The following day, he leaves Arga and follows the map toward the marked location. Ryoma reaches the forest indicated by the quest, but the number of monster signals immediately worries him. Following the map deeper, he finally spots the settlement and can hardly believe what he sees. The supposed nest is far larger and more heavily populated than expected. The mass of orcs resembles an entire village rather than a small nest. Ryoma realizes that leaving them alone would allow the herd to multiply until it spilled out of the forest and threatened nearby settlements. Accepting that he must destroy them now, he converts god points into additional magical power. Ryoma launches a large-scale attack across the orc settlement. His magic tears through the densely packed monsters and reshapes the battlefield, eliminating most of the horde before they can organize a counterattack. One enormous orc remains after the first assault. Since attacking from the air may not be enough against such a durable opponent, Ryoma lands and prepares to use powerful earth magic at close range, choosing a direct confrontation despite the danger. The giant orc survives Ryoma's initial strike and charges with frightening force. Ryoma braces himself as the monster closes the distance, discovering that this enemy is far tougher than the ordinary orcs already destroyed. Because the battle is taking place in the middle of a forest, Ryoma hesitates to use fire magic and risk creating an uncontrollable blaze. The giant's relentless pressure leaves him little room to worry about collateral damage, forcing him to focus entirely on surviving and winning. Ryoma changes tactics and continues bombarding the giant with magic that will not ignite the surrounding forest. The attacks begin producing visible results, so he maintains the pressure and looks for a chance to finish the monster safely. With the giant finally weakened, Ryoma unleashes a decisive burst of fire. The flames engulf the remaining orcs and burn through the powerful leader, ending the nest's resistance in one overwhelming final attack. When the flames settle, the giant orc is dead but somehow remains standing, making Ryoma doubt the victory for a moment. After confirming the monsters are defeated, he purifies the devastated area and transforms it into another sanctuary rather than leaving corruption behind. As Ryoma relaxes, the supposedly dead giant lashes out with the last of its strength. A brutal final attack catches him off guard and tears into his arm. He recognizes that this is not the time to panic and immediately focuses on staying conscious. The pain and blood loss overwhelm Ryoma before he can fully recover. His vision fades, and he collapses in the ruined nest after barely surviving the giant orc's dying counterattack. Ryoma regains consciousness to find that his injured arm has already been healed. Relieved by the recovery, he admits that the giant orc was far more dangerous than expected and reflects on how overconfident he became after defeating the wyverns. The purified nest has completely become a sanctuary, and the quest registers as complete. Ryoma's level rises to 12, roughly the strength of a mid-tier adventurer. Although he receives the premium meat, the recent battle has destroyed his appetite, so he stores the reward for later. Ryoma decides to treat the painful experience as an important lesson rather than a failure. He heads back toward Arga, planning to replace his torn clothing and take a proper bath so he can feel physically and mentally refreshed. Although purification magic can clean his body, Ryoma still wants the comfort of bathing. Before he can continue shopping, familiar voices call his name. He turns around in shock and finds Ruin, Perme, and Roma standing in Arga as if fate has drawn his friends directly to him. The three explain that Fails fell into an uproar when Ryoma suddenly left, so they accepted an escort job that brought them along his route. Their unexpected reunion delights everyone, But Ryoma quickly warns them not to call him by the famous apostle name while he is traveling incognito. Ryoma explains that he is using the name Taro until the excitement surrounding his identity dies down. He also learns that Gimel has struggled to control the crowd's gathering fails after his departure, confirming that leaving quietly was probably the right decision. His friends ask what happened to his damaged appearance, and Ryoma admits that an orc nest caused more trouble than expected. He says that he plans to remain in Arga for the day and resume his journey toward the capital, San Angeras, the following morning. Since their escort request is already complete, Ruin, Perme, and Roma ask to accompany Ryoma to the capital. They have wanted to visit San Angeras themselves, though the sudden proposal makes Ryoma wonder how they will cover the travel expenses. Ryoma offers to pay the group's expenses, saying that their company will keep the journey from becoming boring. Everyone agrees that if they are traveling together, they should make it an enjoyable trip, and the three formally place themselves in his care. Before departing, Ryoma helps the group prepare. Since one companion has merchant connections, they visit the necessary shops and pre-purchase equipment and supplies suited for a longer journey rather than relying on whatever they already carry. Ryoma also decides to install additional divine applications that may be useful on the road. He studies the available choices carefully, looking for abilities that will improve both safety and comfort during the trip. 2 applications stand out. Rest Area, which creates an invisible dimensional shelter where invited companions can sleep safely, and a camping application that provides a tent, bonfire, barbecue set, and protective barrier. Ryoma installs both, impressed by how completely they solve ordinary travel problems. With his level increased, Ryoma can also learn new magic. He chooses Ice-Snow magic, which freezes objects, and Lightning magic, a special attribute capable of controlling electricity and even influencing weather at high power. The potential is so extreme that he decides these 2 abilities are more than enough for now. The newly formed traveling group leaves Arga and begins moving toward the capital. Ryoma enjoys having familiar companions beside him again, while quietly waiting for a suitable opportunity to test the dangerous spells he has just acquired. A giant mantis appears along the route, and the others prepare to fight. Ryoma stops them because he wants to use the monster as a target for his new abilities, confidently asking everyone to let him handle it. Ryoma activates Ice-Snow magic, instantly freezing the giant mantis and restricting its movement. Seeing that the first spell works exactly as described, he prepares to follow it with the second and much more destructive attribute. Lightning crashes down on the frozen monster. The sudden electrical attack tears through the creature with overwhelming speed, demonstrating that Ryoma's newest magic can strike before an enemy has any chance to react. His companions stare at the result in fear and amazement. They identify the first spell as an ice attribute and the second as lightning, while Ryoma confirms the names and studies the damage caused by powers he has never used before. The group praises Ryoma's terrifying talent, but he notices how conspicuous the spells are. Their scale and appearance would attract attention anywhere, so he reminds himself that he still needs practice before he can control them discreetly. As evening approaches, the companions begin discussing where to camp. Ryoma tells them there is no need to settle for an exposed roadside camp because he now possesses a much safer method. Ryoma opens the Rest Area application and invites everyone inside. The hidden dimensional room astonishes the group, who realize that this comfortable shelter is another one of Taro's extraordinary abilities. The Rest Area includes beds, a toilet, and even a bath, while neither monsters nor uninvited people can enter. Ryoma offers the sleeping spaces to his companions and gives Perma privacy in the most suitable room, earning their enthusiastic gratitude. With the journey's first night safely arranged, the group raises their drinks in celebration. They toast to travel together and enjoy a relaxed meal without worrying about monsters attacking their camp. Ryoma serves orange juice brought from his personal space and stored in his inventory. His companions have never tasted the fruity drink before and are fascinated by its sweetness, while he enjoys sharing a small piece of earth with them. Everyone immediately asks for more. Ryoma reveals that he also has coffee and cola, then lets them sample the carbonated drink. The unfamiliar fizz shocks them at first, but its sweetness quickly turns the cola into the most popular item at the table. After the meal, the companions take turns using the bath. For adventurers, accustomed to wiping themselves clean while camping, soaking in hot water feels like an unbelievable luxury, and they emerge completely refreshed. Roma encourages Ryoma to use the bath next. The others quietly wonder why he remains so calm in the intimate atmosphere, concluding that a demigod may simply experience embarrassment and excitement differently from ordinary humans. Ryoma finally bathes inside the rest area, relaxing after the difficult orc battle and the long journey. Surrounded by familiar comforts, he is reminded once again that his divine applications make traveling far easier than it should be in this world. A week passes after the group's departure from Arga. By now, Ryoma's companions have become accustomed to his unusual drinks and comforts, joking that everyone is probably waiting for another chance to enjoy the juice. Near the town of Muarago, the group encounters a merchant caravan stopped in a dangerous area where monsters often appear. A guard warns them not to linger, while Ryoma asks whether they have finally reached the next town on their route. The sharp sound and bubbles of cola catch the attention of someone in the caravan. One traveler recognizes carbonation immediately, reacting in a way no native of Mur should understand. The stranger suddenly asks Ryoma whether he is Japanese. The unexpected question exposes the possibility that another person from Earth is standing before him, putting both men on guard. Neither can safely assume the other is friendly until they understand how and why both reached this world. The traveler explains that he is a reincarnated soul. In his previous life, he was a Japanese man named Miyama Ryosuke, while in this world he is known as Tawork. His straightforward confession proves that Ryoma is not the only person carrying memories of modern Japan. Ryoma introduces himself with the alias Taro, and Tawork immediately asks for cola instead of continuing the tense interrogation. He also recognizes Ryoma as the apostle from the rumors, but promises to keep the identity secret, allowing both reincarnators to relax. Tog, the procurement officer of the Wellwind Trading Company, decides to treat Ryoma and his companions as honored guests. After introducing himself, he asks permission to taste the mysterious drink that has captured Tawork's attention. Ryoma gives Tog a glass and tells him to drink slowly, rather than swallowing it all at once. The merchant is startled by the fizz, but quickly notices the intense sweetness beneath the unfamiliar sensation. Tog assumes the drink must require a fortune in precious sugar and asks whether Ryoma is a noble. To protect the Taro alias, Ryoma fabricates a simple cover story, claiming that his wealthy family expelled him and that he now travels independently. Tog invites the group to travel with the caravan, but monsters interrupt the discussion. Before anyone can finalize the arrangement, Ryoma turns toward the threat and prepares to protect the merchants. Ryoma eliminates the monsters so quickly and silently that the caravan barely understands what happened. The effortless victory leaves the guards staring in amazement at the young traveler they had just assumed was an ordinary displaced noble. The merchants praise Ryoma for eliminating the monsters before anyone was harmed and thank Tawork for recognizing that the quiet traveler was trustworthy. In return, they offer to arrange lodging in nearby Muarago, giving the group a comfortable place to stay. The inn prepared by the trading company is far more luxurious than expected. Ryoma feels slightly guilty about accepting such expensive hospitality, but the merchants insist because he saved them and provided a rare drink they deeply valued. The group gratefully accepts the lodging for this night, though Ryoma plans to use the rest area on future occasions where trouble may arise. As everyone settles in, they discuss dinner and assign rooms before resting. The next morning, Tog and Tawork arrive at Ryoma's room with another visitor. Their formal greeting makes it clear that the trading company's leadership has become personally interested in the mysterious traveler and his drinks. The newcomer introduces himself as Oigus, head of the Wellwind Trading Company. He welcomes Lord Taro with exaggerated enthusiasm, revealing that news of the cola has already reached the company's highest authority. Oigus explains that he wants to discuss business concerning Ryoma's unusual beverages. Ryoma dislikes being pulled into commercial negotiations, but after the company provided excellent lodging, he feels unable to refuse the meeting outright. Oigus asks to taste the sparkling, sweet drink he has heard about. Ryoma pours a glass, and the merchant confidently samples the cola, expecting merely an exotic product rather than something completely outside his experience. The carbonation bursts across Oigas's mouth, followed by a sweetness he has never tasted. Instantly convinced of its commercial value, he offers 10,000 binas per bottle and asks Ryoma to supply cola to the Wellwyn Trading Company. Ryoma claims that only a few bottles remain because he intends to enjoy them slowly with his friends. In truth, his personal space can provide an endless supply, but he refuses to turn that divine privilege into a business. Even when Oigas raises the offer to 20,000 binas, Ryoma remains unwilling. Ryoma firmly rejects the sale and prepares to end the meeting. Oigas is disappointed, but accepts the decision, saying that simply meeting Lord Taro has still been worthwhile, though his greed clearly has not disappeared. Late that night, someone urgently enters Ryoma's room. Tawork appears exhausted and agitated, making it obvious that the failed negotiation has created a far more dangerous problem than anyone expected. Tawork warns that Oigas is gathering assassins to ambush Ryoma and steal the cola. Although Tawork owes the merchant a great deal, he could not remain silent after learning that Oigas intended to murder travelers for a profitable product. Tawork reveals that he knows Ryoma is the apostle. Rather than oppose a divine being for the sake of a greedy employer, he abandoned Oigas and came to warn him. Ryoma promises not to expose the betrayal and begins planning their escape. While preparing to leave, Tawork notices Ryoma's smartphone and recognizes it immediately as technology from Japan. Ryoma postpones the explanation and orders everyone awakened, because the assassins may already be moving into position. The group gathers their belongings and leaves the inn in a hurry. Tawork asks what Ryoma intends to do, while Ryoma focuses on getting his companions away before Oigas's men can surround the building. Tawork admits that he desperately wants to learn about the smartphone and any other Japanese objects Ryoma possesses. His hunger for connections to his former life is unmistakable, and Ryoma agrees to help however he can once they reach safety. Ruin, Permi, and Roma wake in confusion, but Ryoma quickly explains that Oigas's assassins are almost there. The group rushes into the night, trusting his warning without wasting time on unnecessary questions. They do not escape quickly enough. Armed men surround the travelers in the darkness and pretend to question why they are moving at such a suspicious hour, leaving Ryoma with no peaceful route out. Tawork steps between Ryoma and the assassins. One of the attackers recognizes him and orders him aside, but the reincarnated swordsman refuses to abandon the people he warned, even though the enemies are former associates. The assassins say Oigas's orders are absolute and accuse Tawork of betraying the hand that fed him. He pleads with them to stand down because they are outmatched, but they reject the warning and charge to eliminate the entire group. A close-range fight erupts in the street. Ryoma avoids using spectacular magic that would expose his identity and damage the town, relying instead on controlled movements while Tawork and the adventurers hold back the attackers. The conflict begins attracting attention, exactly what Ryoma hoped to avoid. Deciding that restraint has gone far enough, he releases enough power to stop the assassins instantly without allowing the battle to spread farther. The surviving attackers finally understand that Taro is not an ordinary noble or magician. The pressure of his magic terrifies them, and they realize too late that Oigas ordered them to target someone completely beyond their ability. Ryoma tells everyone to leave immediately before guards or additional enemies arrive. As the group begins retreating, Tawork stops them for a moment, unwilling to be left behind after sacrificing his place in the trading company to help them. Tawork runs after the escaping travelers and asks them to wait. Ryoma opens a route toward the rest area, allowing everyone to disappear from the streets before the assassins can recover or reinforcements can arrive. Once safely inside, Ryoma apologizes for dragging his friends into danger and getting them hurt. He struggles to calm his breathing, blaming himself because the cola and his concealed identity caused the entire incident. The others immediately reject that guilt. They insist that Oigas and the assassins are responsible, not Ryoma. Tawork also apologizes for the trouble, but the group thanks him for warning them and attempting to protect innocent people. After discussing their options, Ryoma decides to continue towards San Ongaras as originally planned. He asks whether everyone still agrees despite the danger, and his companions choose to remain with him rather than abandon the journey. Tawork accepts an invitation to travel with the group as well. Ryoma welcomes him aboard and tells everyone to rest inside the secure rest area for the night, where no assassin or monster can reach them. The next morning, Ryoma wakes early and prepares coffee. Tawork rises soon afterward, still sleepy, and gratefully accepts a cup. Sharing an ordinary Japanese drink creates an unexpectedly peaceful moment after the previous night's violence. Tawork asks whether Ryoma can produce anything from Earth. Ryoma explains that he cannot create items freely and is only retrieving things from a specific stored place. Tawork says he would use such an ability to become a billionaire, but Ryoma refuses to exploit it for profit. Their conversation turns to reincarnation. Tawork explains that he died as a college student while protecting his girlfriend. Reborn in Mur, he was abandoned by his new parents, grew up in the slums, and was eventually taken in by Oigus after displaying talent with a sword. Tawork says nearly 30 years have passed since his reincarnation and admits that, if possible, he would like to return to Japan. He then asks Ryoma to share his own story, curious about the life and death of another person from their homeland. The discussion shifts to manga they both remember. When Tawork nostalgically mentions a series whose new volumes he always bought, Ryoma reveals that the complete manga is preserved inside his personal space and offers to retrieve it for him. Tawork can hardly believe the physical manga is real. Holding the familiar volume and opening its pages fills him with emotion, because something he thought was permanently lost has returned after decades in another world. Ruin and the others wake and discover the two reincarnators reading. They cannot understand the Japanese writing, but the artwork fascinates them. Ryoma explains that manga tells stories through pictures and text, introducing his companions to a new form of entertainment. Soon the entire group gathers around the books. Even without understanding every word, the native residents follow the images while Ryoma and Tawork translate and explain, turning the morning into an enthusiastic shared reading session. Everyone becomes so absorbed that they lose track of time. Ryoma promises the manga will remain available whenever they want to continue, then reminds the group that they still need to reach the capital. The travelers finally arrive at San Angars, the enormous royal capital. Their journey ends at a city far busier and grander than the towns they have visited, beginning a new chapter in which Ryoma must face both the king and the consequences of his reputation. Ryoma is overwhelmed by the crowds filling San Angars. The group plans to find an inn and food, but Tawork first asks to visit the Adventurers Guild. Since everyone has business there, they agree to stop at the guild before settling in. Ryoma explains that one purpose of the trip is an audience with the king, so he wants the guild to send notice of his arrival. The others also hope to find quests. Although Ryoma already knew this meeting was coming, the reality of facing royalty makes him increasingly nervous. The royal messenger will not arrive until the afternoon, so Ryoma's companions visit the guild in the morning to select quests. He wishes them luck and uses the free time to wander through the capital, hoping to understand the city before the formal audience. During his walk, Ryoma notices a district filled with homeless people, many of them beastmen. The poverty contrasts sharply with the capital's grand streets and reveals that even the kingdom's most prosperous city leaves many residents struggling. A tense situation nearby makes Ryoma decide not to linger in the slum. He returns toward the adventurer district, where weapon shops, supply stores, and magical businesses line the road, eventually noticing a magic shop that catches his interest. Ryoma enters the magic shop, considering whether he should buy a staff or another tool that would help him use magic more effectively. The strange interior is crowded with items he does not recognize, making the visit feel like stepping into a storybook workshop. A mysterious shopkeeper notices Ryoma browsing and asks what he is searching for. Her appearance and atmosphere strongly resemble the witches from fairy tales, leaving him unsure how to respond. The woman immediately tells Ryoma that she is not a witch, startling him because she seems to have read his thoughts. She claims it was only a guess and asks again what kind of magical item he wants. Ryoma explains that he can use magic but owns no staff. The shopkeeper presents a short model that would be easy for someone young to swing. Yet when Ryoma holds it, the weapon does not feel compatible with him. Seeing his dissatisfaction, the shopkeeper offers a far rarer staff called Rugride. Made from sacred wood that grows only in sanctuaries, it heals its wielder and wards off evil, making it far more suitable for someone carrying Ryoma's divine nature. The sacred staff reacts intensely to Ryoma, and the shopkeeper remarks that its divine response makes him seem almost like a god. Ryoma decides the weapon would reveal too much simply by being carried, so he asks instead for a less conspicuous staff aligned with water magic. The shopkeeper brings out another extraordinary weapon crafted from remains of Leviathan, the legendary sea dragon. The staff radiates powerful water energy, and Ryoma feels an immediate connection as soon as he reaches for it. Although the Leviathan staff seems difficult to control, the shopkeeper says it has clearly chosen Ryoma. He agrees to buy it, only to learn that it costs 400,000 binas, enough money to purchase an entire house. Yet he pays because the weapon's compatibility is undeniable. The strange shopkeeper thanks Ryoma and invites him to return, laughing mysteriously as he leaves. Ryoma appreciates the purchase, but cannot decide whether the woman was merely eccentric or someone far more knowledgeable than she appeared. People on the street immediately notice the magnificent staff, confirming Ryoma's fear that it stands out too much. He quickly hides it in his item bag. At that moment, a royal attendant arrives to escort him to the prepared audience chamber, and the long-awaited meeting with the king finally begins. King Luiro Findel Goruadi Falande, the 34th ruler of the kingdom, formally welcomes Apostle Ryoma. The grand introduction and sincere respect place Ryoma at the center of the royal court, where every movement feels far more intimidating than any ordinary conversation. Ryoma asks the king to raise his head and expresses hope that they can build a prosperous relationship. Luiro responds warmly, saying that such friendship is more than he could have hoped for, and inviting Ryoma to visit the palace whenever he wishes. The king asks Ryoma to remain at the palace for the night and attend a banquet with the royal family. Relieved that the audience has become friendly rather than political, Ryoma gladly accepts the generous invitation. After thanking the king for his hospitality, Ryoma is escorted from the chamber. Exhausted by the pressure, he admits the meeting was nerve-wracking. His guide offers either to return him to the city or take him to the estate previously gifted by the crown, and Ryoma chooses the estate. The carriage arrives at the property assigned to Ryoma. Even before entering, the scale of the grounds makes it clear that the word estate hardly describes what the king has given him. Ryoma learns that the residence is the Malsert Palace, constructed by a king several generations earlier. The enormous historical building resembles a royal compound rather than a private home, leaving him speechless at the value of the gift. Salvatore, the palace manager, welcomes Ryoma and explains that the butlers, servants, and complete household staff are already waiting. Ryoma can move in immediately and request anything he needs, a level of service that makes him wonder how he could ever live normally in such a place. After hearing that every arrangement is complete, Ryoma tells Salvatore he has one important quest. The manager eagerly promises to fulfill anything the apostle desires, unaware that Ryoma's request concerns his traveling companions rather than greater luxury for himself. Ryoma brings Ruin, Perme, Roma, and Tawark to the palace. They are confused about why they traveled so far, until he casually reveals that the building is technically his house, because the king gave it to him. The companions react exactly as Ryoma hoped, complete disbelief. They shout that the palace is far too extravagant and can barely accept that they may actually stay there. Even Tawark, accustomed to unusual situations, is stunned by the scale of the royal gift. Ryoma admits that he kept the palace secret because he wanted to surprise them. Salvatore has already prepared dinner, and Ryoma has requested a feast for everyone, so he invites his friends to relax and treat the royal residence like home. The palace bath proves as magnificent as everything else. Ryoma and his companions soak in the enormous facility, enjoying a level of comfort that makes their recent nights on the road feel impossibly distant. Ryoma offers to prepare permanent rooms for everyone and says they can even move into the palace. Some companions find the idea overwhelming and prefer smaller, kosher rooms. But they are grateful to know they will always have a place to stay in the capital. Perme enthusiastically declares that she wants to live there, calling the beautiful palace a dream come true. The others try to restrain her excitement and settle on visiting often, while privately wondering whether her fearless attitude means she comes from a more important background than she admits. The next day, Ruin, Perm, and Roma thank Ryoma for the unforgettable stay and return to their adventuring activities. They promise to visit again, while Ryoma admits that the palace would feel far too large and empty if he were the only person living there. Tawork remains behind after collecting his share of the group's money. His real reason becomes obvious when he immediately asks whether Ryoma has more manga. Ryoma goes to retrieve additional volumes, amused that nostalgia, rather than luxury, is what keeps the Reincarnator at the palace. Tawork later prepares to visit the Adventurers Guild, explaining that his instincts will dull if he does not exercise and fight regularly. Ryoma agrees that finding a request sounds useful and decides to accompany him. Ryoma has wanted to enter another dungeon both to overcome his earlier humiliation and to complete divine quests for more points. He checks the available objectives, then suggests gathering information at the guild before choosing which dungeon to challenge. At the San Angeres Adventurers Guild, Guildmaster Begard respectfully welcomes Ryoma, having previously served as the royal messenger. When Ryoma asks about nearby dungeons, Begard explains that 4 major options surround the capital. The first is the Raftia Pasturelands, a vast grassland filled with monsters that drop edible meat. Another is the Fardiassel Salt Lake, home to ferocious fish monsters and valuable salt. The Sage's Tower contains magical enemies, gemstones, and tools, while the final dungeon is the dreaded Gastile Empire. Every monster in the Gastile Empire is undead, making the dungeon uniquely dangerous and unpleasant for Ryoma. The Holy Association currently contains it behind a great sacred barrier, but Begard asks the apostle to conquer it if possible. Ryoma hesitates because undead creatures remain one of his greatest fears. Meshufim suddenly sends an email recommending the Gastile Empire because it contains enormous treasure and new dungeon-related quests. Ryoma feels he has little choice when a goddess personally urges him to go, but he decides to warm up by trying one of the other dungeons first. Ryoma and Tawork arrive at the Raftia Pasturelands. The dungeon entrance and exit are formed by strange pillars, and beyond them stretches an enormous open grassland. Ryoma immediately notices the abundance of creatures roaming in the distance. Other adventurers are already cooking meat obtained inside the dungeon. Inspired by the smell, Ryoma proposes a barbecue after the hunt and promises to use delicious yakiniku sauce from Earth. Tawork becomes instantly motivated, and the two head out to collect the best meat possible. The pair begins hunting across the pasture. Monsters charge from the tall grass, but Ryoma and Tawork cut through the first wave efficiently while searching for prey that will provide high-quality meat. The grassland seems endless, with a massive tree visible far in the distance. They choose the tree as a landmark so they will not lose direction, then notice another unusual creature moving nearby. A new meat-bearing monster attacks, but Tawork defeats it almost immediately. The experienced swordsman's speed proves that the pasture's ordinary creatures are no threat to the two reincarnated adventurers. Ryoma barely needs to interfere, allowing Tawork to demonstrate how far his own combat experience exceeds normal adventurers. Ryoma attempts to test his newly purchased Leviathan staff, but the pressure released by the weapon frightens the monsters before he can fight them properly. Realizing the sacred artifact is far too intimidating for simple hunting, he puts it away. Ryoma reminds Tawork that they came for meat, and that he still wants to test the staff under controlled conditions. Giving them a fresh target, and another opportunity to gather food. The next creature is enormous, and Tawork immediately doubts they can defeat something so large. Ryoma remains calm, judging the monster as a chance to obtain a particularly valuable cut rather than a reason to retreat. Ryoma and Tawork launch a coordinated attack on the giant beast. Their combined power brings it down, and the size of the corpse promises a huge supply of meat for the barbecue. The harvested cuts are all top grade. Excited by the result, they decide to continue hunting at the same pace and secure as much premium meat as possible before leaving the dungeon. More monsters fall throughout the day. Ryoma stores each body and material in his inventory, building an enormous collection, while Tawork continues searching for stronger and tastier prey. What began as exploration gradually becomes an enormous hunting expedition, fueled by Tawork's appetite and Ryoma's limitless storage. At the barbecue, they try bear meat from one of the dungeon monsters. To Ryoma's surprise, the flavor is genuinely good, proving that the pasture's strange creatures can provide excellent food rather than merely quest materials. The high-quality meat becomes even better with Ryoma's yakiniku sauce. Tawork recognizes it as a premium product from Earth, and both men enjoy a meal that combines Mur's dungeon ingredients with the flavors of their former world. The vegetables are equally delicious. Ryoma reveals that they were grown by fairies inside the fairy garden application, explaining why ordinary-looking produce has such extraordinary flavor and freshness. Tawork becomes even more impressed by the resources Ryoma carries everywhere. Tawork marvels at how Ryoma's powers provide safe camping, rare food, and countless conveniences. After experiencing the rest area and earth cuisine, he jokingly declares that he never wants to leave Ryoma's side. The next divine quest points Ryoma toward a supposedly important location near the enormous tree. He and Tawork search the area, but initially find nothing unusual, making them question whether they misunderstood the marker. The map identifies a boss called Yagmlurg, yet the creature appears to be hidden somewhere inside the massive tree. Ryoma realizes that finding the enemy may require entering the trunk or discovering a concealed dungeon within it. After searching for days without progress, the two camp nearby. Tawork warns Ryoma not to fall asleep in the open and catch a cold, while the quest remains incomplete even a week after they began conquering the pasture. A new passage finally reveals itself within the great tree. Ryoma and Tawork enter the hidden interior, where twisted roots and unnatural space suggest that the true boss area lies deeper inside. At the center of the tree, they encounter Yagmlurg, a gigantic serpent-like monster occupying the dungeon's core. Its overwhelming size confirms that the peaceful-looking pasture conceals a boss far stronger than the creatures outside. Tawork attacks first, but his sword barely affects Yagmlurg's armored body. The monster's durability forces both adventurers to reconsider their approach before they are overwhelmed. A direct sword fight is clearly impossible unless they first create a weakness in the serpent's nearly impenetrable scales. Ryoma draws the boss's attention and calls Tawork toward a safer position. By moving through the air and controlling the battlefield, he prepares to use the Leviathan staff without placing his companion directly in the path of its power. A normal attack fails, but Tawork is stunned to discover that Ryoma can fly. Taking advantage of the altitude, Ryoma summons the Leviathan staff and prepares to release the artifact's true water magic from above. Ryoma activates the staff's ultimate water spell. An enormous torrent erupts toward Yagmlurg, filling the chamber with enough force to overwhelm almost any ordinary monster. Ryoma expects the artifact to damage the boss, but even he is unprepared for the spell's overwhelming scale. The attack is far larger than Ryoma expected, and threatens to spread beyond his control. Tawork recognizes the danger immediately as water and pressure crash across the boss chamber. Instead of a controlled strike, the magic becomes a disaster that could endanger Tawork and destroy the battlefield itself. Ryoma spends all his concentration deflecting and containing the violent current. Because every bit of power is needed for defense, he cannot follow with an offensive spell, leaving Tawork responsible for exploiting the opening. Tawork understands the plan and rushes forward, while Ryoma holds back the water. With Yagmlurg momentarily exposed, the swordsman attacks at the precise instant Ryoma creates a chance. Their survival now depends on perfect timing, because Ryoma cannot maintain control of the violent current indefinitely. Even Tawork's strongest slash leaves only a shallow scratch on the boss. The serpent's scales are so durable that a clean hit from an exceptional swordsman barely damages them. The disappointing result proves that even their coordinated opening is insufficient unless they can weaken the armor much further. Ryoma changes tactics by trapping Yagmlurg in a magical cage and freezing the structure solid with ice snow magic. The sudden restraint immobilizes the serpent long enough for another concentrated assault. The freezing strategy works, and the boss is briefly pinned. Ryoma calls for one more attack, hoping repeated coordination can break through the monster's defenses before it escapes. They know the restraint will only last briefly against a creature powerful enough to tear itself free. Yagmlurg responds by biting deeply into the massive tree. The bizarre action confuses Ryoma and Tawark until the surrounding wood begins reacting to the monster's wound. The serpent appears to be feeding on or drawing power from the tree, suggesting the environment itself supports its survival. The bite mark vanishes as Yagmlurg absorbs the tree's life force. Damage to its body heals almost instantly, revealing that the boss can regenerate by draining the enormous plants surrounding its lair. Every successful attack is erased by the regeneration. Ryoma realizes that as long as Yagmlurg has time to consume the tree's vitality, the battle will continue indefinitely and eventually exhaust them. Ryoma concludes that they must destroy the boss in a single decisive sequence before it can heal. He asks Tawark to trust a dangerous plan, agreeing that they will retreat immediately if the strategy fails. Ryoma launches himself directly toward Yagmlurg, deliberately drawing the monster's jaws. Tawark holds position and waits for the exact moment specified in the plan. The reckless maneuver makes Ryoma the bait and places the entire finishing strategy in Tawark's hands. The serpent swallows Ryoma, apparently removing him from the battle. Tawark does not panic, trusting that the reckless action is part of the coordinated attack rather than a fatal mistake. From inside the monster, Ryoma gathers an enormous amount of magic. He calls for Tawark to prepare, counting on his companion to strike the instant the internal explosion weakens Yagmlurg. Ryoma releases his attack from within the serpent's body. The blast tears through defenses that were nearly impossible to penetrate from outside and creates the opening Tawark has been waiting for. Tawark charges with his sword at full power, targeting the damaged section, while the boss is unable to regenerate. Their attacks converge from inside and outside in one final attempt to destroy it completely. Yagmlurg collapses, but Tawark warns Ryoma not to lower his guard because snake monsters are notoriously difficult to kill. They remain ready until the body finally transforms into dropped materials, confirming the boss's defeat. The enormous corpse dissolves into rare items and dungeon rewards. Ryoma and Tawark collect the valuable materials while checking that no further enemy remains inside the giant tree. Only after the body becomes loot do they finally accept that the seemingly immortal serpent has truly been killed. The Raftia pastorulans register as conquered. Tawark admits that a dungeon difficult even for Ryoma would be impossible for ordinary adventurers, while Ryoma is simply relieved that their desperate strategy succeeded. Tawark criticizes Ryoma for intentionally allowing himself to be swallowed, even if the internal attack was effective. Ryoma explains that Tawark's sword could not penetrate the scales, so he planned to weaken the boss from within and then enhance Tawark's blade with lightning for the finishing strike. The dropped items appear extremely valuable, so the pair decides to have the guild appraise them. Ryoma stores everything in his inventory, while Tawark continues marveling at the absurd usefulness of the smartphone-like divine system. Exhausted after the boss battle, they choose to rest inside the rest area. Tawark appreciates safe camping, but complains that there is little entertainment beyond eating and sleeping in the empty dimensional shelter. A familiar voice suddenly reaches Ryoma inside the rest area. The impossible intrusion immediately tells him that the speaker is no ordinary person, since uninvited humans cannot enter the protected space. A lively man appears without warning and greets Ryoma casually. His overwhelming presence and unusual arrival leave Tawark confused, while Ryoma senses that another divine figure has come to meet him. The newcomer introduces himself as Sumeragi and says it has been a while. He explains that something important is approaching. A gathering for all apostles will take place in 2 weeks. Sumeragi describes the event as a yearly social meeting that lasts about a week, allowing apostles to exchange reports and information. One of his direct subordinates will collect Ryoma, so he must keep his schedule open. Ryoma is nervous, but also excited to meet others like himself. Sumeragi disappears as suddenly as he arrived, leaving Tawark bewildered by the whirlwind encounter. Ryoma focuses on the announcement, realizing that he will soon stand before multiple apostles for the first time. Tawork learns that Sumeragi is the founder of the Adventurers Guild and becomes even more impressed by Ryoma's connections. Ryoma only hopes the powerful man truly finds him easy to get along with, because the scale of the divine world keeps expanding around him. After returning from the dungeon, Tawork takes his share of the loot and heads into town, saying he has personal business. Ryoma remains at Malsert Palace to rest and prepare mentally for the upcoming Apostle Gathering. Ryoma becomes so nervous that he cannot sleep. Salvatore informs him that a guest has arrived in the drawing room, and Ryoma assumes this must be the direct subordinate Sumeragi promised would escort him. Ryoma enters to meet the guide, expecting an unfamiliar divine servant. The figure waiting inside immediately shocks him, because her appearance is connected to one of the deepest memories of his former life. The woman looks exactly like Azusa, the older sister of Ryoma's childhood friend. Azusa died in an accident when he was young, so seeing her alive in another world makes him question whether he is dreaming. The guide formally introduces herself as Fini, and says Sumeragi assigned her the honor of guiding Apostle Ryoma. Her voice, face, and manner resemble Azusa so perfectly that Ryoma can barely hear the explanation. A memory returns of young Ryoma visiting his friend Takafumi. There, Takafumi introduced him to his cheerful older sister Azusa, the girl who would soon become an important part of Ryoma's childhood. Azusa noticed how nervous the young Ryoma was, and immediately tried to make him comfortable. She introduced herself warmly, teased him gently, and treated the shy visitor as if he already belonged with the family. Azusa told Ryoma to think of her as his real older sister. For an only child who had always felt isolated, the promise created a bond that remained precious long after childhood ended. Another memory follows, the day Ryoma learned that Azusa had died in an accident. As he cried in disbelief, the remembered image of his big sister seemed to promise that she would always remain beside him. Standing before Fine, Ryoma desperately wants to believe Azusa has returned. Countless words he never had the chance to say rush through his mind, and the emotional shock becomes impossible to contain. Ryoma awakens in his bedroom and wonders whether the reunion was merely a dream. The familiar surroundings only deepen his confusion, because Fine's face felt too real to dismiss as imagination. Salvatore explains that Ryoma fainted while speaking with Lady Fine. Ryoma asks where she is and whether anything happened, while the butler carefully checks his condition after the sudden collapse. Because Ryoma lost consciousness during their meeting, the palace staff suspects Fine may have caused it. She has been kept under observation until Ryoma can explain what happened. Until he wakes and speaks for her, the innocent reunion is being treated as a possible attack on an honored guest. Salvatore says they could not formally detain an apostle's direct subordinate, so Fine is waiting in the drawing room. Ryoma immediately insists that she did nothing wrong and blames his collapse on accumulated exhaustion rather than her actions. Even after calming the servants, Ryoma cannot stop thinking about Fine. Her resemblance to Azusa is too exact, and his heart continues calling her by the name of the sister figure he lost on Earth. Mashufim sends an email answering the question Ryoma cannot ask aloud. Fine possesses the same soul as Azusa Takana Misa, who died in an accident on Earth. Even after reincarnation in another world, the shape of her soul preserved the same appearance. Mashufim calls their accidental reunion across countless worlds a genuine miracle. Ryoma finally accepts that Fine truly is Azusa reborn, and immediately wants to see her again, even though she no longer remembers their former relationship. Fine remains alone in the drawing room, waiting patiently for Ryoma to recover. The distance between them is only a few rooms, yet Ryoma must gather the courage to face someone who is both his lost sister and a complete stranger. Ryoma enters after hearing Fine hurriedly compose herself. Her slightly messy hair and hastily adjusted clothes remind him even more strongly of Azusa, but he forces himself to remember that the woman before him now lives as Fine. Fine apologizes for failing to notice Ryoma's condition, but he insists the collapse was his own fault. She then explains that only a few days remain before the gathering and promises to use Sumeragi's teleportation artifact, making the journey easy if they depart in 3 days. Relieved about the schedule, Ryoma struggles to find another topic because he does not want the conversation to end. He finally offers Fiend some food as an apology for causing trouble, nervously trying to create the ordinary connection he once shared with Azusa. Fiend accepts the offered sweets and is delighted by their flavor. Watching her enjoy the food gives Ryoma a small but precious sense of familiarity, allowing their new relationship to begin without forcing memories she does not possess. Ryoma remembers that Azusa loved chocolate cookies, while Fiend says the unfamiliar sweets somehow feel nostalgic despite being her first taste. The small overlap convinces him further that the same soul remains inside her. He invites Fiend to stay at Malsert Palace until their departure, and she gladly accepts. The day of the Apostle Gathering arrives. Fiend presents Sumeragi's teleportation artifact and instructs Ryoma to stand inside the magic circle. With no ordinary travel required, they prepare to cross directly to the distant meeting place. The teleportation succeeds, bringing Ryoma and Fiend to a magnificent secret castle owned by Sumeragi. The isolated residence exists specifically for divine affairs far beyond the reach of normal kingdoms and adventurers. Fiend leads Ryoma through the castle and shows him the room prepared for his stay. Although the accommodations are luxurious, his attention remains fixed on the coming meeting with the other apostles. Fiend announces that the other apostles are waiting just beyond the door and asks whether Ryoma is ready. He gathers his courage, knowing he is about to meet people who stand at the very top of this world's power. Ryoma enters the gathering chamber and is met by several extraordinary figures. Their appearances differ completely. Yet every person in the room carries an atmosphere that marks them as something beyond ordinary life. The gathered apostles turn their attention toward Ryoma. Under the weight of so many powerful gazes, he struggles to remain composed while Fiend formally brings him before the group. This formal introduction makes him painfully aware that he is the newest and least experienced person in the room. Ryoma realizes that these people truly are the apostles he has heard about. For the first time since becoming a demigod, he stands among others whose existences are equally connected to the gods. An overwhelming pressure suddenly crashes over Ryoma. The combined divine presence makes breathing difficult, and he finally understands how terrifying an apostle can feel when deliberately releasing power. The demonstration is not a real attack, yet it is enough to show that resistance would be almost impossible. The pressure vanishes at someone's command. The group apologizes and explains that they were testing whether the new apostle could withstand their aura and seize them. Ryoma passed. Though the unexpected trial nearly overwhelmed him, one apostle teasingly calls Ryoma a tiny little bean, but formally welcomes him as the sixth demigod, Ryoma Saionji. Despite the joke, the recognition confirms that the others accept him as a true member of their circle. Ryoma is invited to sit, and Sumeragi begins the gathering with introductions. As host, he goes first, creating a structured atmosphere after the intimidating test. The orderly introductions allow Ryoma to learn who each legendary figure serves and what kind of person they have become. Sumeragi introduces himself as Ryutaru Sumeragi and explains that his power specializes in creating and destroying things. He then passes the turn to Visfar, beginning a series of introductions that reveal how differently each god's blessing manifests. Visfar identifies himself as a vampire and a member of the demon race. He received the blessing of Hoptu, the god who governs sin and punishment, granting him authority tied to darkness and demonic power. Visfar explains that he rules over races deeply connected to dark power. He casually warns Ryoma not to mistreat his people, because offending them would lead to a very unpleasant response. Hana Higuchi introduces herself next, blessed by Atan, who governs truth and falsehood. She has lived in Mur for roughly 700 years and missed Japanese cuisine so much that her cooking efforts eventually led to the creation of an entire country. Hana explains that her eyes can distinguish truth from lies with certainty. Ryoma immediately understands that deception is useless around her, though her cheerful personality makes the frightening ability feel less threatening. Usul introduces himself as an apostle blessed by Manaphiel, the deity governing earth and life. His calm, dignified presence contrasts sharply with the more energetic members of the gathering. Ryoma listens carefully, realizing that every apostle embodies a very different divine authority and history. Usul is the spirit king, who protects the world tree, with elves and dwarves counted among his kin. He asks Ryoma to get along with them, despite their difficult personalities, then says he has a question concerning the unusual world tree presence surrounding Ryoma. Usul senses a world tree, unlike any belonging to this world. Ryoma grows nervous because the source is the sapling inside Fairy Garden, but Usul says the subject requires a longer private discussion and asks to continue it at their next suitable meeting. Eizo Shimura introduces himself as an apostle blessed by Natina, the deity of conflict and victory. His restrained manner and traditional bearing immediately remind Ryoma of a wandering samurai. His composed introduction suggests a disciplined warrior whose quiet strength does not require exaggerated words or gestures. Sumeragi explains that Eizo arrived about 400 years ago and has traveled constantly without settling down. In pure combat ability, Eizo and Visfar rank at the top of the apostles, making Ryoma even more nervous when his own turn arrives. Ryoma introduces himself and explains that Mishafim, the goddess of games and pleasure, granted him the ability to manipulate games. In broad terms, he can influence outcomes such as victory and defeat, though even he admits the power still feels vague. The other apostles react with amusement, saying the highly specialized ability suits Mishafim perfectly. Ryoma feels slightly embarrassed that his authority sounds far less majestic than creation, destruction, or control over entire races. Ryoma then reveals his smartphone. The others immediately recognize it as an unusual object, and he explains that he uses the device to communicate directly with Meshifim. The familiar modern device immediately becomes proof that Ryoma's relationship with his goddess differs from traditional divine communication. He demonstrates that the smartphone can grant mana and skills, store items, display locations, and manage applications. When he mentions the world tree sapling in Fairy Garden, the group concludes that the device is a genuine divine artifact, and several members openly wish they had one. Ryoma warns that the smartphone is not something he can simply reproduce or distribute. To ease the disappointment, he brings out snacks and drinks stored from Earth, and invites everyone to enjoy them. The Japanese sweets and sake immediately excite the reincarnated apostles. Hana calls the experience a dream, while the others become nostalgic over flavors they have not tasted for centuries. For a brief moment, the gathering feels less like a meeting of immortals and more like homesick Japanese friends sharing memories. While eating, the gathering moves to regional reports. Sumeragi discusses political tension in the Great Murgus Empire. Visfar mentions unrest and trade among demon territories, and Usul reports threats around the world tree. The relaxed meal masks information capable of affecting the entire world. After absorbing an exhausting amount of political and military information, Ryoma retreats to the open-air bath attached to his room. The warmth helps him recover from the tension, though his mind remains crowded with everything he has learned. One report particularly concerns him: the abyss locusts that nest in the world tree. Every year they multiply in huge numbers and damage both the tree and the wider world, while the evolved evil locusts are exceptionally powerful and difficult to eliminate. The apostles originally exterminated the locusts as a necessary duty, but eventually turned the operation into a competition over who could kill the most. That annual contest became known as the Abyss Festival. Sumeragi invites Ryoma to participate in the next Abyss Festival, and warns that it will be his first time facing the swarm. Eizo and the others eagerly anticipate the competition, while Ryoma tries to sound confident despite imagining thousands of giant insects. Ryoma returns to his personal space to restock drinks, snacks, cola, vegetable juice, and Japanese sake for the gathering. Since Eizo especially enjoyed the alcohol, Ryoma prepares a generous supply while considering what else might please the group. Visfar suddenly appears inside the personal space and announces that he finally managed to enter. Ryoma is horrified because this private dimensional room should be inaccessible to everyone except those he personally invites. Visfar explains that he has mastered spatial magic and can interfere directly with dimensions. His ability to breach even Ryoma's private space, proving why he is considered one of the strongest apostles. Visfar says Ryoma's explanation of spatial storage made him curious and asks for a tour. Ryoma nervously agrees but repeatedly tells him not to wander alone or touch things without permission. The final room is Ryoma's hobby room, filled with treasured possessions from Earth. He warns Visfar to handle everything carefully, knowing that a reckless apostle could destroy irreplaceable items by accident. Visfar reacts like an excited child, examining figures, books, and tiny dolls as priceless treasures. His delight is so sincere that Ryoma begins enjoying the tour despite his initial fear. Ryoma allows Visfar to choose from the books. The vampire immediately begins exploring the shelves, fascinated by entertainment and knowledge from a world he never personally experienced. His excitement shows that even an ancient, terrifying ruler can become childishly curious when offered stories from another world. Visfar can read Japanese because Sumeragi taught him. He becomes absorbed in manga, and Ryoma feels happy seeing him enjoy it. When Ryoma mentions that the story also has an anime adaptation, Visfar eagerly asks to watch it. Ryoma demonstrates anime, then introduces video games. Visfar is amazed by moving, speaking images, and quickly becomes enthusiastic about controlling a character himself. The unfamiliar technology captivates him almost instantly, transforming the feared vampire into an eager beginner learning modern entertainment. After playing an action game, Visfar thanks Ryoma for the enjoyable experience and gives him a mysterious dungeon item in return. He admits that he picked it up merely to pass time and does not know its exact function. Visfar suggests asking Sumeragi to identify the item. Ryoma stores it in his inventory, while Visfar immediately returns to the game, proving that the supposedly fearsome demon ruler has become completely addicted to Earth entertainment. The following morning, Ryoma and Visfar attend a luxurious buffet breakfast. Hana greets them cheerfully, and the gathering feels more like a strange family vacation than a summit of world-shaping beings. Eizo arrives and offers a brief, restrained greeting. His silence contrasts with the louder apostles, but the relaxed breakfast allows Ryoma to feel increasingly comfortable around everyone. His reserved presence adds balance to the table while the other personalities continue filling the room with noise and energy. Ryoma notices Hana taking an enormous amount of food and wonders whether she intends to eat it all. She becomes offended when he suggests she has done this before, while the others casually begin collecting their own portions. Ryoma soon realizes that all the apostles eat extraordinary quantities. Their divine bodies consume food without ordinary limits, making the buffet tables empty at an alarming pace. Ryoma watches in disbelief as dishes meant for a large gathering disappear faster than the servants can replace them. With no formal schedule for the day, everyone chooses how to spend their free time. Ryoma plans to ask Sumeragi about the items Visfar gave him, while the others continue relaxing around the castle. Hana privately asks whether Ryoma's spatial storage contains soy sauce, mirin, miso, mayonnaise, ponzu, and other Japanese seasonings. She has spent centuries recreating them from memory, but cannot perfectly reproduce the originals. Ryoma offers the seasonings without charge. Hana refuses to accept such valuable ingredients for free and gives him a bag containing large quantities of magical fruits, including varieties that extend life, rejuvenate the body, and increase magical power. Ryoma retrieves the requested condiments from his personal space and hands them over. Hana's gratitude is overwhelming, because the authentic ingredients may finally allow her to perfect recipes she has pursued for hundreds of years. Hana promises to recreate even higher quality seasonings and let Ryoma taste them first. She also invites him to consult her whenever he faces trouble, turning the exchange into the beginning of a useful friendship. After parting from Hana and Visfar, Ryoma heads towards Sumeragi's room. The enormous castle proves confusing, and what should be a simple walk soon becomes another navigation problem. Without a clear guide, every similar corridor makes him less certain that he is moving in the correct direction. Ryoma wanders through unfamiliar corridors and realizes he is completely lost. The embarrassment feels especially familiar after his dungeon experiences, but there are no servants nearby to ask for directions. Just as Ryoma considers searching randomly, he encounters Fini. She is equally surprised to find him wandering and asks why he is alone in that part of the castle. The accidental encounter gives Ryoma another precious chance to speak privately with the woman who resembles Azusa. Feeney's habit of slightly raising her pinky when surprised matches Azusa perfectly. Ryoma explains that he became lost while trying to reach Sumeragi's tea room, and Feeney immediately offers to guide him there. Feeney brings Ryoma to the correct room. He thanks her, but as she prepares to leave, he feels disappointed that their conversation must end so quickly. Instead of letting the opportunity vanish, he struggles to find the courage to keep her beside him a little longer. Gathering his courage, Ryoma invites Feeney to share a meal with him the following day. She accepts politely and says she would be delighted, leaving Ryoma stunned that the invitation actually succeeded. After Feeney departs, Ryoma celebrates privately. What he calls a simple dinner feels like a genuine date, and the prospect of spending time alone with Azusa's reincarnation fills him with nervous happiness. Ryoma finally meets Sumeragi and asks him to examine the items Visfar provided. Sumeragi agrees and requests to see them, curious about what the dungeon-loving vampire considered unimportant loot. The appraisal may reveal whether the mysterious artifacts are harmless curiosities or treasures powerful enough to change future battles. The first item, Usperios, is a top-tier staff with exceptional affinity for wind, water, and lightning. In the hands of an apostle with enormous mana, it could even summon an entire storm. Other treasures include the magic cloak of Axel, which repairs itself, adapts to environments, changes shape, conceals mana, and purifies the wearer. The treasured sword of Shamsa is actually a key to a hidden treasury, while Eileen's protection automatically creates a powerful barrier when its owner is endangered. Sumeragi also identifies the angel and demon rings of Sonar. One accessory summons an angel and the other a demon. Ryoma appreciates the angelic power but is uneasy about calling a demon, even though both artifacts are extraordinarily useful. After the appraisal, Ryoma asks Sumeragi for one more favor, a private room where he can eat alone with a woman. Sumeragi immediately becomes amused and asks who the partner is. Ryoma admits that he invited Fene. Sumeragi teases him about love at first sight, but Ryoma insists the situation is more complicated and begins explaining Fene's connection to Azusa. The teasing forces Ryoma to describe the painful memories and reincarnation mystery that make his feelings impossible to explain simply. Once Sumeragi hears the circumstances, he promises to prepare an excellent dinner setting. Ryoma insists that he wants to cook the meal himself, turning the request into a serious personal challenge. Elsewhere in the castle, Visfar remains in an unusually good mood after discovering Ryoma's games and manga. His carefree behavior draws attention from someone who has been waiting impatiently for him. A powerful woman confronts Visfar and demands to know how long he intends to leave her alone. She introduces herself as Visfar's wife and apologizes to Ryoma for her husband causing another scene. Ryoma is shocked to learn that Visfar is married. Tristi drags her husband home, while Visfar asks Ryoma to visit again. The sudden domestic reversal makes the terrifying vampire apostle seem far less intimidating. Ryoma turns his full attention to planning Feeney's dinner. With access to rare meat, magical vegetables, and ingredients from Earth, he struggles to choose a menu worthy of the person he wants to impress. Sumeragi advises Ryoma to consult someone who understands both this world and Japanese cuisine. The suggestion immediately points toward Hana, whose centuries of cooking experience make her the ideal teacher. Ryoma asks Hana for cooking advice. She instantly realizes he is preparing a meal for a girl and enthusiastically offers to help. Ryoma insists on doing the actual cooking himself, so they begin developing the menu and practicing together inside his personal space. Hana teaches Ryoma how to balance the sweetness of sauces and bring out the natural flavor of the magical vegetables. After repeated adjustments, the dishes finally reach a level that satisfies both cooks. The next day, Sumeragi prepares a private room while Ryoma finishes every dish. He brings the completed meal from his personal space, arranges the table, and waits nervously for Feeney to arrive. Feen announces herself outside the room. Ryoma welcomes her in, trying to hide how nervous he feels now that the long-awaited dinner is actually beginning. Every detail he prepared now feels far more serious as the person he hoped to impress stands just beyond the door. Seeing Feen dressed for the occasion leaves Ryoma speechless. He awkwardly guides her to the table, overwhelmed by how beautiful and familiar she looks. Her appearance overlaps so strongly with his memories of Azusa that he needs a moment to recover his composure. They raise their glasses and begin the meal. Fiend thanks Ryoma for the food and is immediately impressed by the gentle, carefully balanced flavor of the first dish. Her positive reaction immediately eases some of Ryoma's anxiety and confirms that his careful preparation was worthwhile. Ryoma explains that he used special vegetables and prepared them to maximize the ingredients' natural taste. Fini is shocked to learn that he personally cooked everything, rather than relying on Sumeragi's servants. Fini enjoys the meal so enthusiastically that she briefly loses her composure. Embarrassed, she apologizes, but Ryoma says he is happy and would gladly cook for her as many times as she wants. As they relax, Ryoma asks about Fen's usual work. She explains that she clears dungeons around the Great Mergis Empire's capital and hunts powerful monsters, a dangerous occupation that surprises him. Fini admits that she is hopeless with magic, but extremely skilled with the great sword Sumeragi gave her. Ryoma laughs that they are opposites. Magic is his greatest strength, while close-range weapon combat remains difficult for him. Fini confesses that paperwork is another weakness, because every document requires slow, careful writing without mistakes. Her exaggerated frontish makes Ryoma laugh and briefly breaks through her formal demeanor. The complaint reveals a surprisingly ordinary side beneath her powerful, disciplined image as a veteran apostle and warrior. Fini becomes embarrassed by her unrefined complaint, but Ryoma tells her not to worry. When she declares the dessert the best she has ever eaten, her expression and enthusiasm overlap painfully with Ryoma's memories of Azusa. Ryoma suddenly begins crying. He explains that Fini looks exactly like someone who once loved and protected him as a younger brother. Although he tries to deny being rude, the memory overwhelms him. Ashamed of losing control, Ryoma apologizes for showing such a pathetic side of himself. He believes the dinner has failed because his grief interrupted what should have been a happy evening. Fini refuses to let him withdraw. She says she will listen whenever he needs to speak, and asks not to make such a sad face, instinctively offering the same comfort Azusa once gave him. Her kindness triggers another vivid memory of Azusa comforting young Ryoma during difficult moments. He quietly thanks Fini, feeling the bond between the two lives even though she cannot remember the past. Ryoma apologizes again but refuses to let the relationship end awkwardly. When Fini mentions that she will soon return to her work in the Great Mergis Empire after the gathering, he searches for a reason to meet her again. Ryoma asks Fini to let him treat her to another meal when that time comes. He promises to work harder so she can enjoy the next dinner from beginning to end without sadness interrupting it. Fini accepts the invitation with genuine delight. The promise gives Ryoma hope that he can build a new relationship with her, instead of only mourning the Azusa he lost. Rather than replacing the past, the new promise gives both of them a chance to create memories belonging to the present. The following day, Visfar and others begin returning to their territories because the main business of the gathering ended on the first day. They invite Ryoma to visit the demon lands, describing them as dangerous but exciting. Hana also prepares to return to her country and mischievously asks how Ryoma's dinner went. He answers vaguely that it was acceptable, thanks her for the cooking help, and promises to explain more another time. The remaining apostles exchange farewells and leave through their own methods. Ryoma decides that he should also return to San Angars rather than remain alone in Sumeragi's castle. The once crowded gathering has ended, and the enormous divine residence quickly begins returning to its usual silence. Sumeragi asks whether Ryoma is leaving too. Ryoma says he came to say goodbye, and Sumeragi admits the castle will feel lonely once the gathering completely ends. Their brief conversation shows that even a powerful founder surrounded by servants can feel the loneliness left behind after friends depart. Ryoma says he is glad he participated because he became friends with the other apostles. Pleased as host, Sumeragi gives him a shared bag, one of two connected containers that allow items to be inserted or removed from either side. Sumeragi keeps the matching bag and tells Ryoma to send items that need appraisal. He also promises to place useful supplies inside for Ryoma. Overwhelmed by the artifact's value, Ryoma thanks him and accepts the encouragement to keep growing. Ryoma gives Sumeragi a present in return, a laptop computer from Earth. He remembers how interested Sumeragi appeared in modern technology and offers it as thanks for organizing the gathering. Sumeragi explains that his creation power can reproduce objects belonging to this world, but Earth technology is much harder to recreate accurately. The laptop never needs charging, though it cannot communicate through the non-existent networks of Mer. Sumeragi is delighted because the computer still has countless uses beyond communication. Ryoma thanks him for everything, says farewell, and prepares to return home carrying new friendships, divine artifacts, and the promise of meeting Fini again. With the apostle gathering finally over, Ryoma reflects on how exhausting yet fulfilling the experience was. He asks Sumeragi to pass his regards to Fini, and holds tightly to the promise of meeting her again before returning to San Angeres with a much lighter heart. Back at Malsert Palace, Ryoma is welcomed home by the servants and immediately asks whether anything happened during his absence. He learns that Tawork, Ruin, Perme, and Roma arrived earlier that day, so he requests dinner with everyone after taking a much-needed bath. Ryoma reunites with his companions after being away for so long. Although everyone has countless stories to share, they decide that conversation can wait for a moment and raise their glasses first, celebrating the fact that the entire group has safely gathered again. Over dinner, each person recounts what happened while they were apart. Ryoma explains that he attended an extraordinary gathering of apostles, while his friends described their adventuring and dungeon expeditions. Even among such unbelievable experiences, Tawork's oversized tales still manage to dominate the conversation. Ryoma reveals that he plans to enter the Gastile Empire dungeon the following morning and invites the others to accompany him. After hearing that the territory is filled with undead, however, they honestly admit they would only become a burden and choose the safer Sage's Tower instead. Ryoma assures them that the invitation was only a suggestion and apologizes for putting them on the spot. His companions explain that they intend to remain together and explore the safer Sage's Tower. So everyone exchanges sincere warnings not to overwork. Before the evening ends, Ryoma remembers the gifts he brought home. He presents Perme with prototype sweets made by Hana Higuchi, complete with the famous chef's autograph, and tells everyone to relax as though the palace were their own home. Perme is almost overwhelmed by the unexpected treasure. The next morning, Perm declares that she will preserve the signed package forever, forcing Ryoma to remind her that the sweets are meant to be eaten. After saying farewell and resting properly, he travels alone to the entrance of the Gastile Empire, whose oppressive atmosphere feels sinister before he even steps inside. The interior is swallowed by such complete darkness that Ryoma can barely see the ground beneath his feet. Unable to judge the path, or detect what might be hiding nearby, he slows down and realizes that moving forward without creating his own light would be far too dangerous. Ryoma uses divine magic to illuminate the passage, revealing a dungeon that feels every bit as ominous as its reputation suggests. Consulting the divine quest, he confirms that his first destination is a settlement called Foreign Village and begins advancing through the eerie territory. As Ryoma walks deeper into the dungeon, faint voices seem to whisper from somewhere beyond the light. At the same time, he cannot shake the sensation that unseen eyes are following every step, making the empty road feel crowded with presences he cannot identify. Although the supernatural pressure unnerves him, Ryoma forces himself to remain calm. He reminds himself that divine magic is especially effective against undead creatures, so even if the voices belong to ghosts, he possesses exactly the power needed to defend himself. A pale figure suddenly appears within the darkness, but it vanishes before Ryoma can clearly confront it. Left staring at an empty passage, he realizes that the dungeon's inhabitants may not attack in ordinary ways and keeps his magic ready for whatever manifests next. Refusing to let the haunting atmosphere delay the quest, Ryoma quickens his pace and finally reaches Foreign Village. The abandoned buildings and lifeless streets are even more unsettling than the road, making it obvious that something terrible happened to everyone who once lived there. The silence breaks when decaying villagers begin emerging from the settlement. Ryoma immediately recognizes them as zombies and braces himself as the undead surrounds the path, confirming that Foreign Village has become another nest of the dungeon's curse. Ryoma releases divine magic directly into the approaching zombies. The sacred power tears through their corrupted bodies exactly as he hoped, proving that his apostle ability can purify the undead and giving him a reliable method for clearing the ruined village. After the battle, Ryoma discovers a surviving book and uses the translation application to read it. The record describes a plague that killed the villagers one after another, rotting their skin while they were still alive until frightened survivors began calling the disease a punishment from God. The diary becomes even more horrifying as it explains what followed the deaths. The corpses rose again and attacked those who remained alive, turning the village into a living hell. Knowing that death is close, the final writer leaves only a desperate plea for someone to save them. Ryoma recalls how destructive spirits and grudges were sometimes enshrined as gods in Japan to calm their rage. For a moment, he wonders whether a similar force is controlling this dungeon, but he rejects useless speculation and decides to keep purifying every victim he encounters. 4 days after entering Gastile, Ryoma has cleansed yet another ruined village. The repeated scenes of death are wearing on him, but the quest continues onward, directing him toward the next settlement, a town called Omizo. Even undead goblins and kobolds disturb Ryoma far more than their living versions, so he welcomes the chance to stop for the night. Inside his rest area's protective barrier, hostile creatures cannot enter, allowing him to eat and recover without constantly fearing an ambush. Ryoma's relief disappears when a small skeleton calmly walks through the supposedly impenetrable barrier. Because the protection only rejects hostile beings, its entrance proves that it does not intend to attack him. But the impossible visitor still leaves him completely bewildered. The skeleton attempts to communicate, moving and speaking in a way that clearly carries meaning. Unfortunately, Ryoma cannot understand the strange sounds, leaving both of them facing one another in awkward silence, despite the creature's obvious determination to tell him something. Realizing that the skeleton is trying rather than threatening him, Ryoma asks whether there is another way they can communicate. He watches its gestures carefully, hoping that patience and simple signals will reveal what the lonely undead child wants from him. Unable to explain with words, the skeleton gestures for Ryoma to follow. Since it has shown no hostility and appears desperate for assistance, Ryoma decides to trust it, leaves the safety of the rest area, and follows the small figure into the darkness. After walking for what feels like an unusually long distance, Ryoma is led to a Western-style mansion standing deep within the ruined land. Its isolated position and decaying appearance make him suspect a trap, yet the skeleton continues toward it without hesitation. The skeleton opens the mansion's door and enters first, disappearing into the shadowed interior. Ryoma is left outside for a moment, staring at the entrance and wondering what kind of undead presence could be waiting inside such an ominous building. Despite every warning instinct telling him to be cautious, Ryoma cannot abandon the child after coming this far. He steadies himself, prepares his magic, and steps into the mansion, determined to learn why the skeleton brought him there. A rotting undead woman appears inside the mansion, immediately revealing the danger hidden beyond the doorway. Ryoma realizes that the skeleton did not lure him here to attack, but brought him to confront someone whose corrupted existence it could not resolve alone. The undead woman lunges violently, forcing Ryoma to defend himself inside the confined mansion. He keeps the skeleton out of danger and prepares divine magic, understanding that ordinary attacks would only damage the body without releasing the tormented soul trapped within it. As the confrontation continues, Ryoma notices the small skeleton watching from nearby rather than fleeing. Its behavior makes it clear that the undead woman is personally important to the child, so he restrains his fear and searches for a way to purify her without treating her as a mere monster. The child's connection to the mansion becomes painfully clear. Behind the terrifying remains lies the tragedy of a mother and son abandoned in this isolated place, and Ryoma begins to understand that the skeleton has endured the dungeon alone while waiting for someone capable of helping her. Through desperate gestures and the few feelings Ryoma can grasp, the skeleton begs him to save its mother. The request transforms the encounter from a simple undead battle into a rescue, and Ryoma recognizes how much hope the child has placed in a complete stranger. Ryoma accepts the child's plea without hesitation. He promises to do everything he can for the mother, then turns toward the corrupted woman with divine magic prepared. Not to destroy her in anger, but to free her from the curse holding her body and soul. Sacred light fills the mansion as Ryoma casts divine magic at full strength. The spell surrounds the undead woman, washing away the darkness that has sustained her, and beginning the purification the skeleton has waited so long to witness. The holy power proves overwhelmingly effective against the undead. Unlike physical attacks, it reaches the corruption itself, dissolving the unnatural force controlling the woman, while leaving Ryoma certain that her suffering is finally approaching its end. The woman's ruined form disappears within the expanding light. As the last traces of the curse are purified, the mansion grows quiet, and the child watches the person it called mother finally released from the dungeon's grasp. When the light fades, the small skeleton remains beside Ryoma instead of vanishing with the woman. Unsure whether the child needs time to grieve or still has unfinished business, Ryoma decides not to force anything and quietly stays near it for the moment. Ryoma wonders why the child was not purified along with its mother. He gently asks whether it also wants him to use divine magic, but the skeleton refuses and instead indicates that there is something important Ryoma still needs to see. The child presents a diary, and Ryoma's translation ability allows him to understand the writing. The opening entries describe a woman who married a duke and once lived happily with a kind husband, revealing that the mansion's tragedy began inside a noble family rather than with the plague alone. As Ryoma continues reading, he compares the diary with the child standing beside him. The fragmented clues force him to reconsider what happened in the mansion and who the woman truly was, while the skeleton silently waits for him to uncover the truth recorded by its mother. Later entries describe the husband suddenly rejecting his wife after becoming involved with another woman. Confused, jealous, and increasingly unstable, the writer begins cursing both of them, while Ryoma realizes that the diary belonged to the skeleton child's mother. The writing gradually collapses into incoherent rage. The woman claims that her husband and his new companion imprisoned her in this mansion deep within the forest, yet her final clear request is not revenge. It is a plea for someone to take care of her son. After learning the mother's last wish, Ryoma asks the skeleton whether it wants to leave the mansion and travel with him. The child agrees at once, and Ryoma warmly promises that they will go together rather than leaving it alone in the dungeon again. Ryoma leads the skeleton away from the mansion, beginning their journey as an unlikely pair. Although the child still cannot speak in a way he understands, its willingness to follow shows that trust has already formed between them. An email from Mishufim explains that a tame contract would let Ryoma communicate telepathically with the child and even take it outside the dungeon. After purchasing the skill from the god store, Ryoma calls the skeleton Shrael and explains that being tamed will make them true companions. The contract succeeds, finally allowing Shrael's feelings to reach Ryoma clearly. The child expresses heartfelt gratitude for saving the family member trapped in the mansion, and Ryoma understands that accepting the request has given Shrael a reason to keep moving forward. Mishufim adds that Shrael can grow by consuming magic stones and defeating monsters, possibly evolving enough to recover his original form. Remembering the human figure connected to the child's past, Ryoma resolves to help Shrael become stronger and regain what the dungeon stole from him. With the contract complete, Shrael follows closely behind Ryoma as they resume the quest. The tiny skeleton no longer wanders the dungeon alone. He now has a companion, protection, and a path toward becoming something more than the undead remains he was reduced to. Ryoma reflects on how remarkable Shrael truly is. The child survived alone in a dungeon filled with monsters, protected the memory of his mother, and kept searching for help despite everything. To Ryoma, that perseverance proves Shrael is far braver than his small body suggests. Wanting Shrael to defend himself, Ryoma offers him a sword and asks whether he would like to try fighting with it. The child accepts, giving Ryoma the chance to discover whether his new companion possesses any natural combat talent. Shrael begins practicing with the weapon, carefully repeating swings and movements under Ryoma's supervision. Although his skeletal body is small and inexperienced, his determination is obvious in every attempt, and Ryoma patiently watches for the stuff that suits him best. Srail quickly reveals an impressive talent for swordsmanship. Ryoma studies a sword manual through the library and teaches him the techniques, causing the child's skill to improve by leaps and bounds. Encouraged by the progress, they promise to keep training together. On the road toward Aomizo, Srail fights monsters and consumes the magic stones they leave behind. Each victory makes him noticeably stronger, convincing Ryoma that continued evolution may truly restore the child's original human form one day. After traveling through the undead territory, Ryoma and Srail finally arrive at Aomizo. The quest's next destinations stands before them, but the town's silence and ruined appearance immediately suggest that its people suffered the same fate as the villages they passed earlier. They enter Aomizo and find streets stripped of ordinary life. Empty buildings and decaying surroundings stretch across the town, leaving no sign of the residents who once lived there, and making the stillness feel more threatening than an open attack. A lone man appears and reacts with surprise to the unusual sight of a human traveling beside a skeleton. He remarks that almost nothing remains in Aomizo, then cautiously confirms that Ryoma is human and not another enemy roaming the abandoned town. The stranger introduces himself as Barca and tells Ryoma there is no need to remain so guarded. Offering temporary shelter, he leads the pair toward his house and says they can make themselves comfortable before he leaves them to settle in. Barca explains that every other resident of Aomizo is dead and that he personally buried them all. Now serving as the town's gravekeeper, he urges Ryoma and Srail to stay for the night, insisting that the exhausted child needs proper rest. Ryoma initially tries to decline the generous offer, but a disturbing presence outside makes him hesitate. Something about the darkened town feels wrong, and remaining inside Barca's house suddenly seems safer than continuing through the streets without knowing what is watching them. Barca warns that the outside is dangerous and orders them to remain quietly indoors. By morning, however, their host has disappeared without explanation, leaving Ryoma and Srail alone in the house and suspicious of what happened during the night. Outside, Ryoma discovers that the ground has been violently disturbed. The marks look as though something buried beneath the soil crawled upward, turning Barca's story about personally burying the townspeople into a far more ominous detail. Ryoma asks Srail to help investigate Aomizo. Together they search the streets and examine the disturbed area, hoping to identify what emerged from the ground, and whether Barca's disappearance is connected to the town's dead residents. At first, their search reveals nothing, except empty buildings and silence. Just as Ryoma begins to think there is no clue, a ghostly presence appears nearby, and he hears a faint voice trying to communicate a single urgent message. The spirit vanishes after whispering the word free, leaving Ryoma confused about what it wants released. Before he can investigate further, the divine quest updates, confirming that the apparition was connected to the true threat controlling Aomizo. The new quest orders Ryoma to defeat the demon Barcadias, who has bound the souls of Aomizo's people. Seeing the name, Ryoma immediately connects it to Barca, the apparently helpful gravehumper who welcomed them the previous night, and realizes their host may have been the dungeon's hidden enemy all along.